Well, good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee, and this is the 28th meeting for 2020. Apologies have been received from committee members Gordon MacDonald and Alison Harris, and I welcome today John Mason back to the committee, who is attending as a committee substitute. So welcome back, John.
Thank you.
We'll start with item 1 on the agenda, and that is a decision by the committee to take items 4, 5 and 6 in private. Are we agreed?
Yes.
Thank you. We turn now to item 2 on the agenda, which is our COVID-19 inquiry, where we're looking at the impact of the COVID situation on Scotland's businesses, workers and the economy. And for our first panel, we have some young people with us whom I'll introduce now and welcome this morning to the first session. These are Carla G. from Girl Guiding Scotland, Anna Brown, also from Girl Guiding Scotland, Maya Tamsgray, who is from the Orkney Youth Forum of the Scottish Youth Parliament, and Hope Lang, who is also from the Orkney Youth Forum Scottish Youth Parliament. So I'd welcome them in particular. And also I think Hope's Modern Studies class at Kirkwall Grammar is watching in this morning, so welcome to all of you as well. I think I've indicated that if you allow broadcasting a few seconds to turn your microphone on before you start to speak when you're responding to a question or making a point. So we'll start first of all with questions from committee member Richard Lyle, who joins us remotely. Richard Lyle.
Thank you, convener. Good morning, panel. Can I ask what impact COVID-19 has had on your education and employment? What are your individual experiences?
Who would like to start on that question? Obviously, you may not wish to respond to all points, but there may be a particular area that you feel you have experience that you could share with the committee. Yes, Carla G.
Carla.
Hi there. As a school leaver, everything sort of happened quite abruptly at the end of March. The plan was always to defer university for me anyway, but as everything happened in March, it was all totally unknown. I didn't know if I was going to be going to university at all, or if I was still going to defer, or if I was going to go as of now. It's changed over the summer and things. I was furloughed from my part-time job. So everything was all up in arms there, of course. I'm recently back at work there and I've decided to keep the deferral. So I've got my place next year at university. And I've recently just found another part-time job to run alongside my other. I'm running 2 part-time jobs for the next foreseeable future. And then we'll have a look and see what is happening and if I'm going to university and everything.
Well, everything goes well for you. Maya or Hope, have you any input you'd like to give? Hope.
Hi. So my personal experience meant that I was unable to find employment for over the summer. I would have been working within the tourist sector as seasonal staff, but due to the lack of tourists, there was no need for the extra staff. This meant that I had no income over the summer, which a lot of it would have been put towards my savings for saving up to go to university next year. This same experience is one that hasn't been uncommon. The majority of my peers were left unfurloughed. One of my peers wasn't furloughed due to not working full-time hours. However, when her place of work opened again, she was expected to work full-time hours and put on the rota to do so. I believe that there's a common misconception that young people working to earn money is just for leisure. People often don't take into account that young people also have bills to pay, parents to support, especially those whose parents lost their jobs due to the pandemic or were unable to work due to being ill. Yes, as young people, we will also use the money for our own leisure, but we also gain other skills from employment. For example, many employers and education institutions look for work experience when receiving an application from a young person. And being unable to work has left many young people at a disadvantage because they'll be missing this valuable attribute from their CV for when applying to things. So I believe they're really disadvantaged in other ways, not just earning an income.
Thanks for that, Hope. Maya, have you got a comment to make?
Yeah. So my experience is I've just left secondary school, so I've just finished 6th year. And so I'm at university now. And obviously normally I would have been expecting to work over the summer to prepare to come here. And I had 2 summer jobs lined up to start when my exams finished. But obviously, as when the pandemic happened in March, I hadn't already started those jobs. I wasn't furloughed from them. So I haven't had any income over the summer at all. And now I'm at university, obviously, just having to rely on my student loans, really. I've tried to apply for jobs, but living in Orkney, there is, like a limit to the amount of jobs that are on the island. And there is, it's quite competitive at the moment, where we've never had that before, really. There's always been more jobs than there are people, whereas now that's not the case at all. And I wasn't able to get any jobs from anything that I applied for because I was always competing with adults, really, that had a lot more experience than I did. I know that that's the experience that lots of young people in Orkney have had, and we've heard that through the Youth Forum, and as an MSYP, I've heard that a lot. And so it really has had an impact on employment in Orkney. Lots of businesses are having to close, so there's even less options that way. But the pandemic's definitely had a really big impact on my employment experiences this year.
I wish you both well. Thank you, convener. That's me.
Thank you, Richard. I think Anna Brown had something she wanted to come in on there. So just before we move on to our next committee member, Anna.
So I had a slightly different experience. Before Christmas, I started a part-time job that has a 3-year contract. So I was lucky in the way I kept that up. But I work for a charity that works with children with autism. So for me, it was a lot more of the impact on them as well as us, because it was youth groups that couldn't run. We had to adapt and start doing our activities online. And it also meant we couldn't do our usual summer activities, because when it gets to summer, we change. We don't do our usual term time stuff. We do different activities like fun days, family days out and things. So that meant I didn't have an income in the summer. And that was okay for me. I was staying at home for uni. It wasn't too bad. But one of my friends lost her job and couldn't get another one because of the pandemic. And she had to reject her uni place because she couldn't afford to move to uni. So a lot of people have had it really bad. Like one of my friends is now at college for a year when she could have been at uni, but she couldn't afford it because of the job situation. And also the whole exam thing really affected a lot of people. Like for me, my teacher gave me a lower grade as her predicted grades, because a lot of teachers do that because they think it motivates us to work harder as well. So when I asked her about the grades changing, she said she gave me that, but she knew if I sat the exam, I'd have done better. So even though it was my exam results, I was getting a lower grade, and that couldn't be changed because it was what the teachers predicted. So it's a lot of wee things we don't really think about, and it's not that that maybe affected my future, but it's more just the thing of you didn't have the chance to actually do it and get the grade you should have got. And yeah, it's yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for that. We'll now move to questions from the Deputy Convener, Willie Coffey, and I think he's joining us remotely as well.
Yeah, good morning, Convener, and good morning to Carla G, Anna, May and Hope, and of course to Kirkwall Grammar School if they're looking in. We were talking to some young people last night, and one of the guys was from Orkney, Andy I think his name was, and I was asking them what kind of help it is they think will help them most to find work when you're ultimately trying to find a job. And they talked about things like paid apprenticeships, internships, work experience as you're learning. things like that. What are your ideas? What do you think we can do to help you most when you're trying to get that really important first job? What can we put in place that would help to make that transition a wee bit easier for you? And it'd be lovely to hear something from each of the four panellists that we have this morning.
Anna, yeah, sorry.
For me, it's a bit of, so I knew I wanted to go to uni because I wanted to do politics and languages, so I had to go to uni for that. So I wouldn't need the apprenticeship side of it, but a lot of the issues is the hours. So part-time jobs kind of expect you just to be at school, and then when you're not at school, you can work any hours. So I think that's part of the struggle in getting a job just now is the hours. There's not jobs that are maybe just a Saturday a lot of the time. So it's hard to find one you can balance with your studies. And then that obviously has an effect for your income. So I think it'd be good to have some kind of help with more part-time jobs, just a few hours a week. Like, I think apprenticeships and everything are great, but we need ones we can do at the same time as school.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Me? Hope? Hope?
I think one of the main challenges at the moment due to the pandemic is those that are looking for work experience within certain sectors. A number of my friends are trying to gain work experience within schools and hospitals. A number of my peers are completing foundation apprenticeships within things like social services, childcare and healthcare. And a key part of these courses is their placement, which allows them to continue their learning within a practical environment whilst gaining the confidence. And this can mean that they make links with possible future employers. With the pandemic and the restrictions that are put in place, obviously it's meant that young people who are completing their foundation apprenticeships have been left unsure whether they will still be able to complete their work experience or not. We all recognise that the restrictions are put in place in order to protect people against the spread of coronavirus, but we also need to be thinking of the less obvious knock-on effects it's having on young people. Just because it's less important doesn't mean it's less. Just because it's less obvious, doesn't mean it's less important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. The other girls? Maya?
Yeah, I think that I probably would echo a lot of what Hope said there. Orkney has a lot of modern apprenticeships that young people take on in S4 or S5, S6, sort of like senior years, which obviously works really well and takes them straight into jobs, really. And that is a lot of the time how it works. I know a lot of young people have had modern apprenticeships. They've done admin work at the council offices in Kirkwall, and then they end up being able to get a job there afterwards, which works really well. And takes you straight into that and is obviously more practical than some of the higher courses that are offered otherwise. I know that as well for myself, I was able to do work experience in a law firm through the REACH programme that works from Aberdeen University, which was a really good experience for me, and then meant that obviously that's more likely then that I could get into a job in a law firm doing something like that. In the future, I think that supported work experience for young people is really important. Even if that's just sort of like a week or so shadowing, anything like that, I think is really important. But I was also going to say that I think that some of the support really needs to be for businesses to want to take on young people, because I know that there's sometimes sort of stigmas around like young people are lazy and they don't want to do work, that kind of thing, that can make it harder for them to take us on. And I think that, you know, in terms of like the amount of experience we have, that can be difficult. But obviously, like, we can't get work experience if people won't give it to us. And so I think that some of that needs to sort of be, you know, for businesses to have the support to want to take us on.
Good. Carla G, did you say something there? Can we hear from you? Yeah.
I totally agree. I know already I'm in a slightly easier position having had that first job already. You're always going to have experience from that. I know a lot of people who are now just left sixth year and in my year who struggle to find jobs for the last 2 years almost. Since they turned 16, have been applying to job after job after job, and have just totally heard nothing back or been rejected from every single one of them. And I find it quite sad because I know an awful lot of these people have volunteered hours and hours and hours behind the scenes, not just for the end job of part-time job kind of thing, but surely experience and things like that should always help. But it seems to be, and from experience as well, that as soon as you put you're under 18, it's a no-go really. They don't really want you at all. And that's often a checkbox, I totally understand, for legalities and everything. But there's jobs that they just don't want young people in for, which I find really sad. Seeing as people who are now just moving out and have moved into halls just this week can't find jobs because they've never had a job, yet they've got so much experience and so much to offer that nobody will even let them have the chance to show that kind of thing.
Carla G, how do we try to overcome that? Is there something that governments could do to help employers to overcome that problem, and maybe to even help fund internships or something, anything to get young people the chance to get in the door and get that experience? Would something like that help, you know?
Yeah, I'd love to see more internships and work experience and things like that. I know a couple of people who did internships for, I think it was RBS, a couple of summers ago, and that seemed to be such a great way to get their foot in the door. I mean, also for UCAS and university applications and things, but that experience gave them so much to talk about on CVs and things, because as soon as you sort of say volunteering, although the skills are so applicable to what you're doing and can be transferred so easily, people want you to have had experience in a paid job. So I think an internship is the next big step up from volunteering to show you do maybe have a qualification from it or something. That can be tied in with an internship. I reckon that's a good way forward.
Okay. That's really helpful, everybody. Thanks very much for that. Gordon, back to you.
Thank you. And now questions from Colin Beattie.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to look a little bit at COVID-19 over the last few months. As it's developed since March, let's say, there's been a huge amount of information put out there. And I just wonder, what sources of information have you found to be particularly helpful to yourselves? There's a lot of misinformation and so on comes around on social media and so forth. So which organisations have you gone to for reliability and for accuracy of information? Yeah, Hope.
For me, organisations such as the Children's Commissioner for Scotland's office and Young Scot have both been great at providing accessible, clear information to young people. It often feels like when people or organisations are trying to put across information for children and young people, they can be quite patronising by oversimplifying information or displaying it with things like cartoon pieces. And there are definitely some age groups that would benefit from things like this, but I think the Commissioner's Office and Young Scot have clearly recognised that resources for 8 to 12-year-olds should be different from 16 to 8-year-olds, for example. Another example I'd like to mention is the Orkney Young Carers group. I myself am a young carer and a member of the group. Throughout lockdown, I've received numerous messages of support from Lynn, the support worker, and have also been sent out little activity packs to do during lockdown. The Orkney Young Carers group do a great job in providing support to young carers within Orkney by providing respite days, to go out on activity days, and being able to network with other people who are in similar situations. And I think this is an example that many people can learn from. You know, within our local communities, our youth workers and our teachers are the ones that know young people the best. So I believe that any support for young people should be filtered through a local level, like things like schools and youth groups. This would mean that young people would get the tailored support that they need, and also potentially vulnerable young people would be identified by those that already know and work with them.
Thank you. Anyone else? Maya.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with Hope on that, particularly for Young Scot. I know that I've seen that on social media, the sort of graphics and stuff that they put out. They're really accessible for a lot of young people, and I think that works really well. I think I agree as well about it should sort of be coming locally. I think that that's sort of where there can be, you know, the differences with schools and the information that they feel able to provide to young people. and sort of the amount of information they feel they have themselves. I know there's definitely, I've seen like some schools have been really supportive and had a lot of information going out, whereas others haven't. And so I think that if there was, you know, the sort of places like Young Scot, Children's Commission, that are able to do that for everyone, like blanket over Scotland, I think that that works really well. And I think that you know, the way that they put out information, like Hope said, it's not patronising. It doesn't feel like they're talking down to us and like we don't know what's happening. I think that the way that they do it works really well.
And I think it was Anna.
Yeah, so similar to what Maya was saying, I left school in March. It was my last year, and I've not heard from my school since. So I definitely wouldn't say my school. My school is great, but they weren't good at contacting during it. So I've pretty much not heard from them since I left. But I definitely agree that Young Scot's been really good, especially like for social media. They do post a lot of stuff that's easy to see at a glance. You don't have to read through a big document or anything. The information's there, which is really helpful. And also Girl Guiding Scotland's been really good, and my local guiding has really helped me as well, and the information through that. But I also I'm one of these people, like most of the time the first place I'll go is I'll look on like the Scottish Government Twitter, because I find it a bit easier than the website. So I tend to go there the most. But yeah, Young Scotland has definitely been really good as well for younger people.
It's encouraging to hear that. Just to expand on a little bit on that, what services, you've touched on one or two, but what services have you accessed that you found really helpful, particularly helpful? And I know one or two of you have mentioned the odd service there. Yeah, Mia.
I mentioned Young Scot before. They're a service that I guess I've been in contact with. I also had my school's careers advice services. The way that they worked, I thought was really good, because obviously, like, I have left school at this point, so I didn't know how my careers advice was going to work after then. But I had a phone check-in a couple of months after schools closed, which was actually really useful. I think that a lot of young people know that they might need help, but they don't really want to reach out for it, and they feel like other people need the services more than they do often. And I think that that was definitely the position that I was in. So actually to have someone reach out to me instead, so it didn't feel like I was the one that was having to do that, was definitely very useful. I think that that's probably something that works well and could help other young people.
Did anyone else have services that they found particularly helpful? No? Ah, yes. Carla.
I would just agree with Anna, actually. I use the Scottish Government Twitter for the daily tests and positive tests and negative tests and everything, the daily rundown. I found that quite helpful, as it just kept it all together, and at the end of the day, it was all sort of there. I would also agree my careers side of school was also quite helpful. The school altogether sort of let go of all the 6 years and that was it kind of thing. But the careers advice carried on, which was very helpful, just to help everybody through this time. If people were still looking for jobs during the pandemic and everything like that. But I would say Twitter was a great one.
That seems to be a consistent theme. Yeah, Anna.
So I left school in March and my school wasn't good at all with the contact thing. So for me, I'm kind of in the freshers week of university. And so far the university's been okay. Certain subjects more than others. So I've not really heard from like my social sciences subjects, but for my art subjects, like the lecturers have been trying to do Zoom calls for people to get to know each other and stuff, which has been good. It's a lot of adapting. Obviously, it's not the usual, like you can meet people at freshers week and stuff. So it's that side of it's been difficult, but some of the services at uni have been quite useful as well. Like the unions have adapted to do like the events are in person but and online at the same time for people who are isolating and everything.
Okay, it's been very useful. Thank you, Vera.
Thank you very much. We now come to Committee Member Maurice Golden for his questions.
Thank you, Convener. Obviously, you've highlighted lots of the communications and some of the services that you've received. Is there anything, either from personal experience or within your wider group or community, that you've identified as a gap, either in support or a gap in help or resources? I know that Anna mentioned about the school hadn't been in touch, but is there anything that you would like to add that you think would have helped you to deal with COVID if it had been there? Maya.
I think that what I sort of mentioned earlier about the fact that obviously a lot of young people that would normally have seasonal work in the summer that had those jobs lined up and then weren't able to be furloughed because they hadn't started them already. I think that something there, like I definitely would identify that as a gap. That that work obviously wasn't there, and there's not that much that can be done about that. But I know that the educational maintenance allowances were extended for school leavers. I had that. Obviously, it would have finished when my exams ended in May, but it was extended, so I continued receiving it until the schools would have closed in July. That obviously didn't, end my financial stresses, but it definitely came as like a relief to have that happen. And so I think those kind of things definitely work well. And I think that was useful.
Thanks for that. Anyone else? Hope, and then we'll go to Anna.
I think by talking to my peers within the Orkney Youth Forum, they can find information regarding coronavirus. The problem is not knowing where to get the accurate, reliable information. So there's been a big spike on social media regarding fake news about coronavirus, which has just in turn increased anxiety levels within young people and leaves them not knowing where they can access reliable information and who is a reliable source. I believe there's a gap in the support of young people being able to access trustworthy information. Our generation, for the majority, are extremely able with technology. However, this may not be the problem. Not all young people have access to digital technology. They might be sharing the one advice with siblings and parents, or as we know, living in Orkney, we don't always have access to the right Wi-Fi connections to be able to get reliable information.
Thanks, Hope. Anna?
Well, for me, it's I completely agree on the financial side of it. I didn't have my shifts during the summer that I normally pick up, and the extra jobs, young people, because obviously we have exams and stuff, we all try and work the summer. That's when we work, and obviously we couldn't do that, and there wasn't really any financial support during the summer, which had a knock-on effect in uni and the money you then have to saved up for university. And my other thing was we abruptly left education in March, especially like me. I left education in March and I've yet to start back because I'm starting uni. And we're going right back into it as normal, especially people who went back to school. So it's the kind of idea that, yeah, we've had, 6 months without education, abruptly stopped, and we just go back to it as normal. It's really hard to just go back in straight away the same way it finished, because life's changed a lot, and it was really difficult to do the work during lockdown at points because life was so different.
Thanks, Anna. Anything else from anyone? Yeah, okay, Carla.
Just briefly, I totally agree with everything everybody said, but I would say I'd also fallen down a gap as well. I think it was hard for those who had either left school but hadn't started uni or whatever else they were going on to do, or had left uni and so on. There wasn't much from the school apart from the career side, which was okay, but it wasn't always COVID related at all. And I know for a fact the school were actually quite good with communicating with students, but as we were no longer students, that didn't apply. And as somebody over the summer, I was receiving emails from my university, and that was the emails that everybody was getting. Doesn't matter that I was deferring. And the stuff that I was receiving was not great at all on advice on what was going on. And I was just so glad that I wasn't going to university in that September, because it was so unclear from what they were sending out what was going to be happening. So I could only say that the university side of sending out advice and stuff over the summer was causing a lot of stress for a lot of people that I know.
Carla, what wasn't clear? Was it how to, how you're going to get taught, or how you're going to go around the campus, or, what was lacking in that communication?
Well, over the summer, it was an awful lot of it. Everything from obviously your exam results, which sort of decided if people were going to uni, and that was causing an awful lot of stress. And then even just last week, people didn't know if they were moving into halls, they didn't know if they were staying at home, if they could move out, if they weren't allowed. So, and this is even up to today. I know people who have just moved into halls yesterday, and people who are meant to be moving out tomorrow, but they're not sure if they can now, kind of thing. And everybody's sort of been left just as clueless as each other, which is a shame, because it's obviously a stressful time for them anyway. But they've had to just accept that that's sort of the way, and everybody else is feeling the same sort of thing. But I would say the major stress was starting. So obviously moving out, we're moving in, and how it was all going to work this week, next week, freshers, all the things that you're supposed to look forward to were sort of taken away from people and made really stressful.
Thanks, Carla. Convener.
Thank you very much. We now come to Rhoda Grant for further questions. Rhoda?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Good morning. How aware have you all been of government support, and what has been most useful to you, or is there things, are there gaps there that would have been helpful to fill? I hope. And then Anna.
So when I was thinking about how aware young people were of the support that the government has provided, I decided to ask my peers, because personally, being a politically aware young person means that I mainly keep up to date with the work of the government, but as I'm also aware, it's not everyone's cup of tea to watch committee meetings and First Minister's questions every week. So of those who I asked about how aware they were of the government's response to tackle the pandemic, many were left unable to give me much of a response. The things that did emerge through were things like introducing face coverings in schools and the 2-metre rule. There was nothing about the support for young people within employment settings. I believe that this is just as important as having the government schemes. There's no point in having support for young people available if they don't have access to it and don't know about it. So I feel like there is a gap in the actual knowledge of the support available. The support might be there through different schemes, but we need to bridge that gap between actually having the schemes and being able to access it for young people.
And Anna, I think, wanted to come in as well.
I agree with Hope along the lines of we have all the schemes and people don't really know what's going on. Again, I'm quite politically aware, so I check the government's Twitter and I watch the briefings as much as I can and stuff. My older sister, probably a good example, was never politically involved and really knew what was going on. I was her source of information most of the time, but she did at the start watch the briefings. But I think because it went on for so long, people just kind of gave up on watching the briefings and just looked at the news sometimes. So I don't think a lot of people know what's going on, but a gap in support for me is definitely like the people who left school going to university, or they're leaving university into work. We left school, so school kind of went, right, that's you, we don't need to kind of give you the information anymore. And you weren't technically at uni yet, so uni wasn't giving you that information. It's kind of felt like for a good while there was kind of nothing there, like you were just in this gap. You didn't kind of belong in one place or another. And then I know people who ended up starting like master's degrees because they couldn't get jobs after a 4-year uni course. But yeah, for me, like, I know what's, like, to me, the government support's been quite helpful. I went on the Twitter and like the Young Scot stuff the First Minister did as well, that was quite good. But a lot of people who aren't as politically aware don't know that these things are happening.
Okay. looking at things like the career service, who we're going to be speaking to later, have they been helpful? And I suppose, what are your thoughts on the youth guarantee scheme that the government are drawing up? What form should that take to be helpful to young people? Mia?
I don't actually think I really understand what that is, and I think that that might be almost kind of part of the problem that I think might be there. I would say, like the other two have mentioned, like I am quite politically aware, and obviously being an MSYP, like there's the information that I see through that. And I would say that most young people don't tend to follow like the government on Twitter or that kind of thing. Whereas I would say, like, obviously I do, and I see those kind of things, and there's still, I would find that like I don't know all of what's going on and I don't understand what's happening. And I think that even when the information is put out, it's not always in the most accessible ways. You know, it's often a lot of big, long documents that don't make a lot of sense if you're just like a normal young person. So obviously the scheme that you're talking about, I can't respond on that because I've not looked at that, I've not seen it. But I think that the fact that it is difficult to access that information, to understand it properly, sort of is maybe part of the issue.
Can I just ask another supplementary? Because what I think was running through all your answers in that was that there was information out there, but wasn't necessarily very accessible to young people. You know, you are all politically aware, you follow, you research. How could we get information across that your peers would find accessible and, you know, that would be understandable to them? Carla.
So I'm just going to be completely honest. I'm probably not as politically aware as anybody else. And as somebody who isn't, I sort of fall into the gap with people who probably know that there's information out there but don't know how to get it, kind of thing. I would say I didn't see nearly anything pushed over my social media or anything that was a reliable source, apart from the Young Scot and the questions and things. I would quite like to see or hear even things being pushed through my own social media, through like on the radio, all these kind of sources that young people can access. I found Guiding and Girl Guiding Scotland specifically quite helpful, actually. They were constantly giving us resources and things like that. But if I wasn't a part of that, I don't know where I would really be getting my information from.
Hope.
I believe putting it through local youth services. I know for me, the CLD, the Community Learning Development Team in Orkney, have done a great job of supporting people through the pandemic as well as they can. And I think it's really important to utilise these local youth services and provide information through them. You know, young people are already comfortable with people like their youth workers. I think just utilise the services that we already have and give them the ability to be helping the young people even more than they already do.
Can I just ask, Hope, just a very, very quick question on that? Did you still have access to your youth workers during the pandemic? Were they still in touch with you?
Yeah, so being MSYP, we have a support worker and she was in contact a lot, and she was actually one of my main points of contact throughout lockdown, and any questions or queries, I knew that I could go to her for many things. So yeah, for me, that was my main point of contact as my local youth services.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And now Andy Whiteman.
Thanks very much indeed, Convener. Scottish Youth Parliament, in association with YouthLink Scotland and Young Scot, produced your lockdown lowdown report back in April. That was obviously very early in the pandemic. It's a very useful report, and particularly useful to see that broken down by local authority area. Can you tell us something about the main themes that arose from that report and how you've managed? So this is mainly focused, I suppose, on Hope and Maya. And how you've managed to keep those lines of communications and experiences going? In other words, what's the latest on the feedback you've been having? Hope.
Is it for me?
From the report that was taken by the Scottish Youth Parliament, Youth Link Scotland and Young Scot in April, revealed some worrying findings about how young people in Scotland were feeling due to the pandemic. Of those that answered the question about their employment situation, over a third, which is 36%, said that they were moderately or extremely concerned, and a third of those that answered a question about their financial situation said that they were also moderately or extremely concerned too. From a choice of answers on a scale of not at all concerned to extremely concerned, we must recognise that this is a real important issue for young people, and the more must be done to alleviate their worries and fears. Back in our last sit-in in July, we done a virtual sit-in and we passed motions on COVID-19. One of them just passed around education and employment, saying the Scottish Youth Parliament believes that adequate support must be provided to young people making the transition from school to university, college, employment and other positive destinations to mitigate against the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Passing motions like this show that this is a real concern for young people. The Scottish Youth Parliament have taken action on it, and now we're passing this on obviously to the committee and to the government so that they can take it into regard and make sure that whatever support is now put in place for young people has the best interests of young people in mind.
Maya?
Yeah, much like Hope said there, there's obviously the main theme sort of coming out of that was real concerns about employment, finances, and also education. I think that we saw a lot of it with education, obviously people being concerned that their exam results and how that ended up all working would impact what they go on to do in the future, and also what options are available to them. There's obviously limits now anyway with what options are available, and I think that there was a lot of concerns about what was going to be impacted even more by that. We also saw in that report that 58% of the young people that responded said that they had concerns over how they could access their rights as a young person, which I think is a really interesting one. I think that it's really important that young people are involved in meaningful decision making, really, and we're listened to. Exactly like what's happening now. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity. I'm sure that the other three girls are as well. It's really important that young people have opportunities like this to have a say in the issues that are going to impact us. I think that having it sort of rights-based as well is really important. We saw with the SQA situation that wasn't really very rights-based, and then obviously that didn't end up working very well, and the changes happened in those DD turn that sort of helped fix that a bit. And I think that it's important that that sort of thing doesn't happen again in terms of things that end up changing with employment and education again, that young people are involved in those decisions, really.
And I suppose back in April, as I say, it was relatively early on in the pandemic, and I think a lot of people thought it might be over relatively quickly, maybe by the summer. It looks now as if we're going to have to be living with this virus for some time and adapt our behaviour, and the whole of society is going to have to adapt for quite some time. What efforts is the Youth Parliament making to, and indeed Girl Guiding Scotland, to continue to capture the views and opinions of young people, so that we can make sure that going forward we have the, we try and make sure that the young folk have got the best opportunities available? Hope?
I think examples like today for the Scottish Youth Parliament anyway, MSYPs are constantly advocating for their constituents. So things like today, we've consulted with Thornton Youth Forum and with people in our constituency to be able to pass on this information. So I know we're doing that on local levels, and obviously we're passing motions. We've got an upcoming sit-in, and hopefully getting more motions passed so that we can push for better change.
Yes, Anna.
Well, Well, Girl Guidance Scotland are just about to release their Girls Attitudes 2020 survey. They do one every year, but also this year will be a lot more COVID focused, so that will let us see how girls are feeling and what they're wanting to see and what we can do to help in the next year and see the difference. We did do a COVID-19 survey a few months ago, and to kind of balance, we've started doing online meetings and releasing adventures at home packs and new badges that can be done individually at home to keep people engaged and make sure people still have things to do when we can't meet and everything, which has been really helpful for myself as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Or, Maya, sorry, were you wanting to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sort of leading on a bit from what Hope had said with the Scottish Youth Parliament, that at the last sitting that we had, all of the motions that we passed were from our committees, and they were focused on COVID and the things that were sort of relevant to those committee remits. So obviously now there's the sort of action from those motions that are passed. With the Scottish Youth Parliament, we work after we have our motions so that we have the mandate there from young people, that is things that they agree with and that they care about. And so we have quite a lot of motions there that the committees can work on individually. Obviously, we're still doing a lot of online work as well. We have a manifesto that comes out every 5 years that comes from a survey that currently we're consulting on. So there's still quite a lot of consultation happening from us to make sure that we can still be representing young people as well as possible and keep on working on the issues that are impacting them even more throughout the lockdown.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And I don't think any other committee members have any further questions, so I don't know if any of our witnesses would like to make a final comment. You don't need to or have to, of course. The other possibility is if you feel that there's something else you would like to have covered in what you've said, or you think of it later on, which sometimes happens when you're doing something like this and put on the spot. You can send that in writing to the committee, and we'll take a look at that. So is there anything else any of you would like to comment on this morning? If not, then thank you very much for joining us this morning, and all the best for your futures, and thank you again. Bye for now. And I will, I think, suspend the meeting briefly, and we move on to the second panel after that. Well, welcome back to committee members, and we now move on to item 2 of the agenda, which is again our COVID inquiry, looking at the impact on Scotland's businesses, workers and the economy. I would welcome our witnesses for this panel, and they are Tracy Innes, who is the Head of Careers and Employability at the University of Aberdeen, and also convener for AGCAS Scotland. Gary Maxwell, who is the Curriculum Manager in, I think, construction at Edinburgh College. Erin Bartley, who is a Careers Advisor in West Dunbartonshire, or at West Dunbartonshire for Skills Development Scotland. And Kay Hume, who is a Careers Advisor in Orkney, again for Skills Development Scotland. So welcome to all 4 of you this morning. And we'll start off, first of all, with questions from committee member Richard Lyle, who joins us remotely. Richard.
Thank you, convener. I'm sure most of you were listening into the first panel, hopefully, and the main issues that are facing young people. So in your view, what are the main issues facing the young people that you're working with at the moment? Possibly Tracy first.
Yeah, morning. Yes, I have been listening in, and I think I would echo the concerns that have been raised across the previous panel. It's definitely what we're seeing in the higher education market for careers. The challenges are both for current students through lack of access to part-time and summer jobs, which is obviously really important for them supporting their studies, but also for the graduate market, obviously, as well. There's been a huge reduction in the number of vacancies. There's been disruption to the availability of opportunities for graduates, which is leading to obviously lots of uncertainty. So it's a very difficult kind of time, I guess, to be supporting these students and graduates. I think the other point to make, I think, is that the current time is difficult, but it's how long the uncertainty and how long this challenge is going to last for, which is a particular concern, and the knock-on effects that's going to have in the coming years. Graduates who have had employment but now don't have, new graduates entering the market and being delayed entry, and the knock-on that will have for the later years students coming through higher education as well.
Gary, we heard the problems in regard to university and college. Have you any information you wish to give us? The problems facing young people at this moment?
Yes, good morning. Capacity and opportunity are two real challenges just now. For the FE sector, it's very, very difficult to offer the capacity for students who possibly don't have the same opportunities as in financial or stable backgrounds. Young people from possibly a care-related background, it's very, very difficult to have them into the experience of FE. Left school, where do they go? So the capacity there is very challenging for the FE sector. To give a positive destination and an outlet just now is also very challenging. We can say, yes, there's opportunity in apprenticeships and MA programmes, graduate apprenticeships, FAs, but that may not be, it may be false hope. And we really don't want to kind of put that across just now and just give them the facts, and this is what it is just now. This is COVID, and this is what we're trying to achieve in the FE sector.
I'm sure Erin and Kay also maybe want to make comments, convener. Erin?
I'd just like to echo what Tracy was saying, that it is a lot about the length of uncertainty, and that's something that we're really having to manage expectations of. But also things like work experience isn't something that our young people can access right now, and that's something certainly from working in schools that's really been worrying my pupils, because they're at the time of year where they're planning to get some of that experience, and that's not something that they can access right now. And again, as Tracy said, there's a big worry that how are universities and colleges going to view the exam results from this year? Are things going to change dramatically over the next couple of years? And that's definitely something that's been worrying a lot of my school pupils.
Okay.
I think just like everybody said this, the young people were saying it to us, Tracy said it, Gary said it, the work experience is a real issue. That goes right across the board. That's for college courses, for people on college courses, people trying to apply for college or university. Work experience is huge, as is voluntary experience. And obviously employers are anxious about taking people on. So we're slightly concerned, and the young people are slightly concerned about what are they going to put in their application forms in the future if they don't have the relevant work experience. Colleges and universities, yes, they want qualifications, but they also want to know that people have gone out there and done the job or done anything to gain experience in the real world. So we've got a cohort of young people that perhaps spanning maybe 2 academic years, so last year's pupils and this year's pupils, who can't gain work experience. What can we do about that? And is there a way of some kind of virtual learning environment as far as work experience goes? Can we put something like that in place? The other thing, so it's the kind of anxiety, but the other thing that I've been finding as well is the perception that there are no options. There's no options, and that leads to the anxiety as well. So parents have it in their mind, though, they have to stay at school, because there's nothing else to do. Now, often school isn't the right place for young people, and they've gone as far as they can in school, and it would be fantastic to see them move on into further or higher education, but they haven't been able to gain what they needed at school to get into those places. So I think the issues for young people are spanning right from school and beyond into their further or higher education.
Thank you, Convener. Other members may want to, I know Gary wants to come back in, but other members may wish to explore what the comments made. Gary?
Yes. To give you a bit of background for the school-college partnership theme around Edinburgh College in the city, for our department, the engineering and the built environment, we had around about 472 applicants from S4 and above for looking for experience of coming to college in their designated slots. Now, that number has decreased to around 232 over the past 2 weeks, just due to the school's capacity. Now, listening to other members, it's it's apparent that the challenges are out there. Where normally in my department, over the years, it's a big unit of kids that come through looking for further education, looking for that employability skill type thing. When we have facing unprecedented challenges, that there's no IT facilities, we can't get them online, we can't get them into college. The SFC funding is now it's now decreased. That SCP programs are not priority. That we now need to have a look at exactly how best we fit that cohort into the FE sector before even looking at graduate apprenticeships or anything like that. It's very, very challenging for schools and colleges. We have a lot of conversation with different schools within the region, but we just don't have the capacity, and the schools don't have the capacity before we even have that conversation about how we can move it forward.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. I should perhaps have said that if you want to come in on a question, it's helpful just to raise your hand so that I or the committee member doing the questions can see that, or you can type R in the chat box. But don't feel that you must specifically answer every question, and there's always the opportunity to write in after the session as well to cover any matters that you don't feel you had the opportunity to completely cover during this session. So we'll now come to questions from Colin Beattie. Colin Beattie.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Let me start by asking you a very straightforward question. How has the delivery of your services changed during the pandemic? Kay.
Years advisors we offer a face-to-face service. Skills Development Scotland do have a digital offer as well through My World of Work, and we have our contact centre, but we have careers advisors in every single state secondary school in Scotland, where we're delivering group works and face-to-face appointments. So it's been a huge change for the advisors coming out of school in March, and we were still trying to offer the best service we could, but doing it digitally. I would say, I think Skills Development Scotland and the advisors, I think they just went ahead, they grabbed every opportunity to try and get in touch with young people and to reach out to as many young folk as we can. There's this assumption that all young people are great with digital service, they're great with doing things online, they'll be happy on the phone or doing things on the computer. That actually, that's not always the case. Sometimes a phone service isn't applicable or doesn't suit that young person, and sometimes to get that full relationship with a young person who might have some communication difficulties, a face-to-face appointment is the best option. But we've tried everything we can to reach out to as many young folk as we can through the different various channels. So it's been a big learning curve for the careers advisors to kind of push forward into the more digital world. But hopefully, I think we've gotten there quite successfully.
Area where it was a little bit difficult, where people perhaps didn't have the anticipated skills and technology. Were there any other issues that you came up against in delivering your services during this time? For example, was your technology up to it? I was asking Kay still.
Oh.
Sorry, Kay. I was still talking with you.
Sorry, that's okay. I am fortunate that my technology and broadband has, on the whole, been fairly good. I work with students in rural areas. So, for example, I have one pupil in an S4 class on one of the islands. They don't always have the best access to technology. We don't have very good 4G signal. If the Wi-Fi is down, I mean, I understand that can happen in lots and lots of areas. And sometimes what we ended up doing was just a good old-fashioned telephone call, which for a lot of young folk, they've got their mobile phones and they were quite happy with that. You obviously don't get the interpersonal feel of the appointment, but I think as kind of skilled advisors, we're confident enough to kind of try and build that relationship with the young folk, and whichever means that we're using. But it was certainly that there was definitely anxieties from advisors, knowing that they had to try and deliver in a different manner than from their usual face-to-face. But I think most folk have gone ahead. So school has gone back, and we have advisors in our schools, but I'm actually still working from home. And with the school's agreement, I have a cohort of young people who are confident in digital delivery, phone calls, whatever. And I've got a cohort who are happy using this as a method of working. But that took extra work from the school to identify those for schools. And for me, and I'm not going out to my island schools at the minute, just because you have to go on a ferry for an hour and a half or a plane. So we're not using public transport at the minute, so it's all digital delivery. And so far, touch wood, everything's been okay.
Thank you, Kay. I think Gary wanted to come in.
Yes, our delivery looks radically different. We have reduced days. We returned as a department, as a construction department at Edinburgh College, we returned on the 17th of August. We have massive amount of deferred results and assessments from session 1920 that we have to clear to allow industry employers to be able to claim funding through SDS and other managing agent services. We've had to reduce that. By doing that, it then pushes our full-time cohort school kids, young people, people returning into learning out into online learning, which is a massive challenge. We have 27,930 applicants this year, all looking for digital online learning at some point, which is a massive, massive undertaking for the college. When in here, it's very, very challenging. We are a large college, we do have space, but, and it has been documented, it's very, very difficult to manage the situation just now. How we continue to do this over a prolonged period of time is the challenge. It's future-proofing, not only FE, but also the college, I'd say.
Thanks. I think Tracy was wanting to come in, and also yes, Erin as well, because I think our other two witnesses have commented. So I just would like to bring the two of them in at this point. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess just very similar to what's been described, that the move to online has been experienced for the HE career services in right across Scotland, and very agilely, actually. I think we were in a very strong position to move everything online. I think it's also brought some opportunities, actually. So what we've been able to do is connect with employer partners from wider than the regional focus that we might have usually. So we have seen really great kind of online engagement across the world, because obviously our students were all over the place once they've been kind of forced to leave the university campuses. So it's been a really interesting time, I think, where the technology in some ways has been good to facilitate more connections and more opportunities, certainly for online support to be delivered. I think that the flip side of that is the challenge is we don't know necessarily the barriers. So we don't know who's really not engaging because they can't. It's very difficult to reach out to those people because we can't see them. They're not with us, we're distanced. So I balance the kind of opportunities that technology has given us, connect our students and graduates with employers and opportunities, with the challenge that we don't know who's able to not necessarily kind of access that service.
Yeah, just really echoing what everybody else has been saying, but just maybe to pick up on a point that I think it was Hope had said earlier about getting messages out to young people. And I'm sure HE and FE are the same, but in SDS we've really been utilising social media and lots of different platforms to try and make sure we engage with all the young people that we are working with. So for example, in SDS, we did a series of webinars aimed at school leavers, and we had lots of ideas on social media, Facebook, Twitter. We've been utilising things like TikTok as well, doing kind of pilot programmes with them. So really just being really flexible and being really creative. I think that's the way that we as careers advisors have encompassed it, is making sure that we're as creative as possible and as flexible as possible. As everyone else has said, we're really dealing with a mix of people who, some of which are very technically advanced, but others just don't have the opportunity to get involved with some of the technical things. So it's making sure that our delivery is across all different platforms. And as Kay said, sometimes that's the good old-fashioned telephone, but it's also embracing some of the technology that's out there and some of the platforms that the young people themselves are using to make sure that we're covering all bases.
One last question, Commissioner.
Yes, certainly.
Just to ask, on the basis of what you're saying there, has there been any evidence of any disproportionate increase in demand from any particular group? Yeah, Tracy.
I think what we would say for that would be the graduate demand. So what we have certainly seen is a huge spike in the numbers of our graduating students and also previous graduates from previous years accessing our services in a way that we wouldn't ordinarily seen, I think, given the job market challenges that they're facing. So that's definitely been a huge impact. And across Scotland, the Scottish Career Services in HE generally support graduates. Half of our services support for up to 5 years and half with a service for life. So there are challenges with making sure that I think our graduates know that those services are available to them once they've left the university as well, but certainly a lot of them have been finding the services.
Yeah, Gary.
Yes, there is an increase in school leavers applying for FE education, with a drop-off in HE, HNC, HND demand at Edinburgh College anyway. There's a real drop-off in that, with them obviously moving to HE establishments. But yes, there has been an increase in school leaver applications for all courses across the college.
Anyone else want to comment? Yes, Kay.
I think for us, we've seen an increase for a lot of the young people who were on progression courses at the local college. They were on a progression course that was to prepare them for the next level of course. They then didn't get that course finished, so they didn't quite have the units they needed to get to the next level. We were very fortunate in that our college were brilliant and worked a lot with us to design. They quickly pulled together kind of basically a few courses to fill that gap. So we could have seen a huge spike in unemployed young people had they not come in and filled that gap. Again, we were fortunate that they were able to do that. And I know that's maybe not the case elsewhere, but there was certainly, I would say, an increase from people who needed progression level, if they maybe didn't have kind of the qualifications from school that they needed to get into the further education, like NC level or HNC, so people at the layers below that.
Thank you. And now call questions from the Deputy Convener, Willie Coffey, who joins us remotely.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning to the panel. The age-old problem of youngsters finding their way into work, it's been here for many years, and it's worse because of the situation that we find ourselves in. And you heard one of the young people just talking earlier there about how difficult it is to get a job because you don't have the experience that employers are looking for. And another comment I think that was made was that perhaps internships, paid internships, are the next step up from volunteering. But I just ask you to share your ideas with us about what it is we need to do better and differently to try and bridge this gap, so that during this particular pandemic, we can at least give some hope to youngsters that there is a pathway into the workplace. It's maybe different to what we've done before. Should the governments be looking at supporting internships, paid internships? Should we be doing that much more to help employers to do this? Just be really obliged if you could share some of your thinking with us to help us through this. Okay.
I suppose it depends on what level we're talking about internships at. So an internship can often be placed at perhaps a higher education level, and often that's not what's required. It is in some circumstances, but in some areas where lots of people are perhaps underemployed. So, for example, around our own area, where travel and tourism, hospitality is a huge industry for us. We don't necessarily need a high-level internship, but in the past, employers have been able to access funds to take young people on to supplement a salary. Those things are fantastic at encouraging employers to take people on. And we need, I would say there's a real need for those types of schemes to be available, but across the board. So not just for young people who fit into certain categories, but for any young person who's looking for an opportunity to move on, an opportunity to get real life paid work experience. If an employer has any kind of supplement to the salary and support, they're always more willing to take young people on. And I know it has worked in the past. It certainly has worked here. I think that would be, I know money doesn't grow on trees, but it's certainly worth thinking about.
Thank you, Kay. I'd love to hear what the views of the other panellists, if I could. I can see Jerry's hand going up there. Gary, beg your pardon, Gary.
The paid internship it would be a great idea in work placements, and then allowing that work experience to obviously position. The issue I see in the areas is SME, micro businesses, it's companies like that predominantly, if I don't know, I've maybe got 1,100 apprentices in college last year in session 1920. Now, if there's 1,100 apprentices, I would say probably 75% of them come from SME. That's probably not going to be the kind of company that's going to be able to utilise that kind of government scheme. So it has to be very robust, excuse me. It would need to be a robust scheme, and probably either generated with the career service or the colleges in a more focused group type plan. If we just roll it out and say we're going to do this or this, yes, in some sectors it will work, in some it won't. IT possibly, travel and tourism, hospitality, construction, engineering. It's very difficult to have that kind of placement without engagement. Then it goes back to the school engagement. So there's a few pitfalls there. But yes, if with cohesive thinking and group work, you could probably get there.
Okay. Okay. Karen?
I think just to pick up on some of the points that Kay and Gary had talked about there, what we want to do is maybe a bit of preparatory work as well, because thinking about some of the young people that I work with, some of the very disadvantaged ones, there needs to be some preparatory work before they go out in a work placement to ensure that they know the behaviour levels and their confidence levels are up before they go out. And equally, I think we need to work with the employers as well so that they recognise the usefulness of having an intern out with them and how that can benefit their business, you know, by the fresh thinking of that young person and getting to train people from that very basic level. So although that kind of scheme I think is wonderful, I think we would need to do a very big bit of preparatory work and definitely get the schools on board and definitely get employers on board. And of course, some input from the career service to help facilitate that also.
Casey?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we incentivise through funding paid internships for young people that need it. And I think it's really important for us to think as in a collaborative and connected way as possible, so that we don't make it too confusing for employers to be able to tap into those opportunities to connect with young people. So connecting up HE with Skills Development Scotland, developing young workforce. I think at the moment it can be quite confusing for an employer to work out how best to tap into some of this incentive and funding just with one university, let alone across the whole of that landscape. So some connected thinking around that would be really, really helpful, I think. SMEs are huge in terms of the amount of potential to provide really, really valuable experience for students. We and some other universities do receive some Santander funding for SME internship schemes, which are really positive and really start the ball rolling for SMEs to be able to take on graduates in the longer term and see their value. The challenge with that is it is just some universities that get that funding, and that funding comes with particular restrictions each year and conditions. So it's something that will be a bit more freely available and flexible so that we can connect the right employers for the right pieces of work with the right students so that everyone wins. How you do that, I'm sure, is a challenge, but trying to connect it together would be fantastic.
Gary, I see your hand up again.
There is a funding gap, and I think it's clear between FE and HE there is a funding gap of how what we have in resources. For graduates, yes, there's internships. It's easier to actually utilise this kind of model. For a kid who is leaving school, who is disengaged, disadvantaged, the real struggle at school, where do we place this kid? What do we do with them? How do we bring them from A to Z? It's very, very challenging. And internships, companies, SMEs with money, or the big house builders or the multinational companies are only want to work with the best. But what about the other 47% of the school leavers? And that's what we really need to focus on as well, and not forget about them. It's okay for one group, but it has to be for everybody.
Yeah. Could I just follow up briefly, Convener? I mean, who is it that should do the contacting with employers? I mean, take my constituency, for example, right? Come on up Northern Valley. Loads of kids leaving school, going to college, leaving uni, looking for employment opportunities. And they write hundreds and hundreds of letters just randomly directed at employers, and most of the time they don't even answer. We've heard that before, it's been going on for years. Is there a better way of reaching out to employers within a community, a constituency? Try to bring them along this journey with us, encourage them and promote to them the idea of paid internships or work experience, to directly reach out to them and say, we need your help, but what help do you need from us to bring that about? Is that something we could do a wee bit better, do you think? Tracy?
It's something that we've been speaking about recently, actually, because we're conscious that employers they are being bombarded by individuals themselves, and then obviously by all the institutions who are keen to find opportunities for their particular cohort. And whilst I think that there's an element of needing to have the specialist connections for the particular provision that each different provider might be able to make, some kind of portal, some kind of collective information which puts that together so that we ensure that we know what each other is able to do. Because I'm sure we'll be speaking to employers who actually have got needs that aren't necessarily best suited to our students and our graduates. So being able to refer and share that kind of intelligence would be best for everyone. Again, what the solution is, perhaps some kind of portal of technology or a website that brings it all together and would be a good start. But I think something where because there's something for everyone in there, and I think it's accepting that sharing would be better for all than trying to protect contacts. And I know that that would come with some, people will have to have a different mindset around about, if they're trying to meet targets for placements for their particular cohorts of students in their organisations, we need to have a think about that. But I think some kind of connective can only be good for everyone. It would, I think, lead to more opportunities overall for the breadth of people needing them.
Very helpful, Tracy. Any other ideas on that, and kind of making that connection directly with employers to help the youngsters? Is there any new ideas that you could suggest we pick up? Gary?
We obviously do training organisations. We do one with Midlothian Council. We have employers, we have a college, we have the schools, we go into schools, we do all of these kind of roadshow type things. And it really enhances what we offer. But it's really getting the voice out there and telling them this is how to engage, where to go. A portal would be great. Having literature out there, social media, things like that, showing them what could be there. But it's reaching the audience. It's a very difficult task. Websites, things like that. But everybody's fighting everybody's in the same predicament, really, and there's maybe too much diversity when we need to become more focused.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Thanks very much, Convener. Back to you.
All right, thank you. Slight slip up by the technology there. Move on to questions from Maurice Golden. Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Convener. Just thinking about destinations for education leavers, how significant has any reduction been, and are there any particular sectors that have been hit the hardest in this regard? Does anyone have any thoughts? Just feel free to put your hand up. Kay.
I think it's kind of slightly what we were speaking about before about apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are a fantastic opportunity for people, but employers are a little bit, or are perceived to be a little bit wary at the moment, because they have to have young folk out on placement. That goes back to what we were talking about before, about the kind of work experience element of an apprenticeship. I feel that is, for our area, slightly less than what it would normally be, just because of the work experience element.
Thanks for that. Tracy, and then we'll go to Gary.
So in terms of, I guess, the destinations for higher education leavers, there's a real difficulty in really knowing what the impact has been. We've moved from a destination leavers survey, which was 6 months after graduation, to now being 15 months. So the actual amount of information we've got about the real impact is fairly minimal. There are some universities who do exit surveys. So University of Edinburgh shared with me theirs. They had mapped that in June and had come up with some data that 41% were sorted and the rest were not sorted for a variety of reasons. So they were either still applying, they'd had to change their plans, or they were still clueless. But we don't have data like that across all of the institutions. So that's something that we should be, I think, as HE institutions, implementing to get better, more current data. But there's a real gap in that timeline. So we're not going to really know the impact of this year's leavers from higher education for another 2 years in terms of when the data is going to come out. So that's a real challenge for us.
Thanks, Tracy. That's interesting. Gary?
I would echo what Tracy said. I think there'll be a lag in my area anyway until around next year or the year after, 2021 or 2022. I would say that some employers in industries and sectors have made commitments to take on apprentices prior to March. Within the region, within the Edinburgh region, there's massive growth, massive house building, city deal, funding, there's a whole pot of money there. But once things start to then tail off slightly, that's when the lag will kick in. That's where apprentices may fall. As it stands, I'm not seeing a great deal in reduction in apprentices for 2021. The full-time programmes are oversubscribed massively, but probably not last year. 1920 was a very good year for apprenticeships. 1819 was about the standard. Probably seeing that again this year, and it'll be next year where it really kicks in, going back to around 2009, 2010, where it'll crash. So that could have been the recession and such like. That's where we could see impacts, and that's where obviously schools, care services, FE and HE will then start to have progression path routes from there.
Thanks, Gary. Erin?
Yeah, just really to echo what Tracy and Gary had said, at Skills Development Scotland, we're currently going through our census on looking at destinations. That we're going through that. It'll be reported in due course. So we don't have any official statistics yet to show what impact COVID has had on destinations as yet. But that's something that we continuously monitor through SDS, and I'm sure it will be reported very soon.
Thanks for that, Erin. Convener?
Thank you. And now, John Mason.
Thanks very much, Convener. And I think I'm aiming really at Gary, perhaps, with my questions, because I'd like to focus on apprentices. I mean, Gary, can you tell us, for an apprentice, a particular person, what has happened to them since March? I mean, suddenly in March, well, it all stopped. So what happened to that person?
Take my department, for instance, obviously we have all the apprentices going through their training. What happened was we had predicted grades, the SQA and sector skills councils were then able to say, well, we can look at this pretty much like what the schools were able to do. Apart from construction and a couple of other sectors, we were told, no, you can't do this. So in March, it stopped. The college sector apprenticeship stopped. So anybody who was in an apprenticeship couldn't move forward because we were told by SQA and the sector skills councils that every apprenticeship, any assessment decision that was done in college had to be assessed, had to be done. It had to be done, including skills tests and including your on-site SVQ, which is already a very large piece of work for an employer and apprentice. So until the colleges could open back up and until construction sites can open back up, then apprentices weren't doing anything. Companies weren't being paid. CITB, who have their own issues at this moment in time, did pay the levy funding out to the companies for their apprenticeships, but now that levy's not being paid anymore. So if the levy's not being paid, the companies are not looking at taking apprenticeships on. From there, we're having to then now skills test everybody and bring everybody up to a level where they would have been around about April time. So the apprentices are waiting, and I would say that the employers and industry and sectors have been very, very robust and helpful in their attitudes towards it. They have their own challenges, but apprenticeships, I would say, in certain sectors, definitely construction, engineering, have taken a hit on this. And the amount of planning and organisation that's went in over the 27 colleges, I sit on a construction strategy group through Energy Skills Partnership in Colleges Scotland, that we were meeting every week to try and think about how best we do this, to try and get the apprentices through. And it has been a challenge.
Employers take on the apprentices again immediately they reopened in June or July, whenever it was?
The apprentices, they were employed. They were always employed. The apprentices were always employed with a company. And the managing agents, the CITB are the managing, they're probably the largest managing agent for the construction industry. They were managing apprentices with the employers through that process. But they're a 4-year journey. For the majority, 90% of them is a 4-year journey. It's the ones who are coming to the end of that journey who require their skills testing to actually gain the qualifications, either become time served or move on to a higher education. That's the ones that have really affected. And we won't finish skills testing probably until mid-October now, which is a good 5 months later.
Right, so if I'm understanding you correctly, at the end of their courses and apprenticeships, they're effectively delayed by 4 or 5 months, or some months. But the ones part way through are less affected because it's just part of the 4 years.
They are less affected, but this will have a knock-on effect. If there was an apprentice who's still attending college, they normally attend college in the first 2 years of their apprenticeships to do the training element. Then they do the work-based element in years 3 and 4. But if the second year apprentice is still to do their training element and it moves on and we're having to put more weeks in because of COVID, then it's very unlikely that an employer will then go forward and actually take on a new apprentice. Because if they've got a workforce of 8 and 3 of them are apprentices, there's a real chance that they'll lose all 3 at one time, having to come to college, which is a massive strain on their demand, their workforce demand.
I think one of the points, I mean, you made the point about you thought there might be more of a lag, so it's not going to be immediately the impact, it's going to be further down the road. And yet the committee's also heard, for example, that there's a skills gap, there's an ageing workforce. Will they kind of cancel out or not?
I think construction industry at present is a growth industry. I've been around in NFE for a long time, and I've seen it peak and trough. And I think just now it's in a really good position. Regionalised, Edinburgh's in a really good position. Some other regions not so much, but I would say that the skills gap in certain areas is predominantly in other, not construction trades, but other types of construction, professional elements, engineering, areas like that, where it's very hard to do upskilling, or the ageing workforce may not, the retirement age is prolonging, so you'll maybe not see that much of a fall off in that area, if you know what I mean.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, I don't know if any of the other witnesses wanted to comment on apprentices at all. No, just leave it at that. Okay, thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Now, Andy Whiteman.
Thank you very much, Convener. So a number of you have mentioned the challenges obviously facing employers just now, especially in relationship to apprentices. But what's the best experiences that you're encountering with employers at the moment in terms of supporting people into work, and what further needs to be done to enable employers to play the role that they would, I'm sure in many cases, like to do? Gary, I think, would like to come in first.
I think employers are committed to the apprenticeship scheme and also the FA scheme. Being an FE, we don't see a lot, well, we hardly hear anything about the graduate apprenticeship scheme, but the FA and the MA schemes, employers, again regionalised, do engage in this really, really well, and they do see an opportunity to broaden the employers' horizons. I think there needs to be more focus on having an apprenticeship. It needs to be blown up more. It needs social media. It needs a campaign to show the importance of this. Construction, IT, travel and tourism are three of the big ones where apprentices you'll normally find it, where it could be opened up into other sectors where apprenticeships could really blossom. There is a real construction and engineering are okay in apprenticeship numbers this year for the 2021 starts, but having a look at some of the SDS publication for Q1 for this session, it's not looking particularly healthy, and there's some sectors that could really do with real support there. We're looking at employers.
Tracy?
Just wanted, I guess, to make a point about the graduate apprenticeships. At the University of Aberdeen, we don't have a huge amount of experience of that because we only have one framework in civil engineering, but it's been very difficult recruitment-wise this year. And a wider point about graduate apprenticeships is we've had a number of companies interested in the scheme, but what we find is difficult is that there's a disconnect, I guess, or there's a time lag between the employers saying that we'd be really interested in some kind of framework and then having the right framework at the right time at the right institution to be able to match them together. So I think there's definitely been a bit of an appetite when we've been speaking to employers, but then we've not been able to actually deliver that. We've been able to refer them to other institutions, of course, but there's a little bit of a challenge, I think, around the timelines for matching frameworks, delivering them in the regions where they're needed at the right time for the employers that are showing they're interested in them.
Okay, if no one else wants to come in, sorry, Gary wishes to come back. Gary?
Yeah, kind of echoing what Tracy said around about frameworks as well. I think what could be looked at is actually what employer engagement and employers would like in industry. And I think it's very descriptive what awarding bodies say and produce for FE and HE, and what employers actually want in this difficult time could be looked at. I think we need to be more proactive in what we deliver and how we deliver, instead of it's always been this. It could be something more proactive. I think it's very descriptive. It's very long-winded in my view, and I think we could be more reactive as well, and the needs for employers within sectors.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Kay Hume.
I just wanted to make a wee quick point that there are lots and lots of frameworks available and lots of things for employers to need to know when they're employing young people. The apprenticeship framework is fantastic, as are any other frameworks and opportunities that they can offer. However, I think sometimes employers need clearer guidelines. So when we have so many opportunities available, are they all really clear for employers as to which opportunity they can pick and that they can advertise and use that with a young person? Or is there just a huge amount of information that feels a bit confusing for them, so they tend to just leave it on the sideline because they can't really get their head around it all? So I think probably clearer guidelines are what's needed.
Okay, thank you. And do any of you have any views on how the job guarantee scheme that's been announced should be developed? Key things that should include? If you haven't, that's fine. Okay, we'll leave that one. Thank you very much, Convener.
Thank you. And Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Convener. Can I just ask a supplementary just around communications? It was raised by the last panel and there's been some discussion here. I think it was Tracy Innes said that the services don't necessarily know where the young people are at the moment because of changes with COVID. And I just wonder how is it possible to make the services more visible to young people? That was one of the issues that came up in the earlier panel where young people were saying they didn't all necessarily follow every move and every change. So I'm just wondering, is there a way that services could be made more visible to young people so that they could then access them? Anyone wanting to have a go? Erin.
Yeah, I think, as I said in one of my previous answers, it's really looking at developing strategies to cover across all the different platforms that young people use. I think Hope, when she was talking, had said she hadn't really seen much stuff on social media, and it's just making sure that we can cover all bases and use, because there's so much social media out there, make sure we're using all the different communication channels and really targeting what platforms young people are using, because I think traditionally we've very much focused on things like Facebook and Twitter, but the statistics out there show that that's used mainly by older people, not so much the younger cohort. So it's maybe about investigating some different social media platforms and maybe even getting focus groups with young people to find out where they would like information. One of the young people today had said they liked getting information through their youth groups. So it's perhaps looking at a joined up service where we could all make sure we're utilising all the different information outlets out there and making sure young people know where to find us.
Okay, thank you. Do you think there are gaps in provision of opportunities for young people? I mean, we're looking at the Youth Guarantee Scheme. What kind of gaps should that fill and how should it be brought forward to provide young people with the opportunities they need? Any takers? Okay.
I would say a potential gap could be, so for the Youth Guarantee, the guarantee of young people having an opportunity to move into, there's a slight disconnect when it comes to the understanding of qualifications that a young person has. So for example, many employers will ask for a National 4 or a National 5 in the core skills of English and maths. Now, a young person might have been at college and gained a level 4 in communication, but that then is not translated into National 4 English. So there's a slight disconnect in the I suppose the naming of the qualifications and employers' understanding of qualification levels. I think that kind of goes back as well to kind of parents and carers understanding that and I know we've heard it a lot this year, and I heard it on the exam results helpline about, oh, I didn't get my National 4, I didn't get my National 5 English and Maths. And there's, we understand that's what the young people want to work towards, but actually there are other qualifications that are at the same level, just achieved slightly differently, maybe through the college medium rather than the exam medium that schools use.
And how, can I just ask Kate just a quick supplementary just on that, and I'll take Gary in. How could we change that, Kate?
I'm not sure. I think the qualification framework is so big, and I use the qualification framework a lot. In my careers room in school, I have it on the wall, and I show the young people who are maybe considering college that have to stay at school to get their National 4 or National 5. I'll use the framework, and I can just quite easily show them that their college course is at that level. I suppose it's something around the language of qualifications and how that's interpreted by the individuals, by parents, carers, and potentially schools and colleges, because it is quite a minefield. Just the understanding of what each level of qualification means. It's fine if you've got the frameworks in front of you.
Sorry, I think the sound just went a little there.
Oh, sorry, I just said it's fine if you've got the qualification framework sitting in front of you and can explain it to people, but it's not always understood.
Okay, thank you. Gary, you wanted to come in?
I think there needs to be more education around the qualification framework. Take construction, for instance, and this is what's putting some employers off and putting young people off. If a young person leaves school with a NAT 4 or a NAT 5, sometimes with nothing at all, and they're taken on an apprenticeship, the apprenticeship scheme in the Modern Apprenticeship Training Programme is at level 6. We are finding that 30 to 40% of young people who are on that scheme in the construction departments, this is Scotland-wide, don't have the entry requirements to meet that college course. But as they are on that apprenticeship programme, they undertake that level of study. Now, with the reduction in funding to FE and with the impact in the already bloated frameworks that the AMA programmes have, that is putting a massive strain on the college sector. In construction at Edinburgh College, I only have possibly around 10 or 11 full-time courses, and the rest are all modern apprenticeship courses. So predominantly I run through AMAs. And the work that goes into combined assessment, the distance learning, remote learning, over and above our already prescribed 30 weeks of training off-site is massive, and it's a real challenge. And that's where the qualification frameworks sometimes fail the young person.
Can I just try and understand what you're telling us there? Are you saying that additional support needs to go in because there is such a gap between the qualification the young person is starting out with and the level they're working at?
Yeah, because they're starting an STQ level 3 or a PDA level 6, all at that level 6 level. Some don't have, some have probably left the school and went and worked with a member of their family or somebody they know, left school, no qualifications, but it's a positive destination for the school and the career service, and then they're landed at college with no underpinning skill. What we then have to do is then give them that, and you'll find that when modern apprentices come in, to gain an apprenticeship certificate through the modern apprenticeship scheme, you'll need to have ICT at level 5, and we will then have to deliver that over and above the MA contract to allow their student or the apprentice to actually gain the MA qualification. But that's probably not seen by schools and what qualifications they actually need. And there's a massive, massive problem there. We would love to put on a level 5 course, which we have a real good understanding of what the sector needs at level 5. But if a young person gets that straight from school and doesn't have the qualifications, who's been through a level 5, through a National Progression Award or being in an FA, then it's very, very difficult for that young person to actually achieve where they want to go. And that's in my opinion, and the lecturers and the curriculum leaders, we all feel the same, that it's a very challenging qualification for a young person who doesn't have that level of knowledge. There needs to be the additional funding was stripped out maybe 4 years ago, I think, where it's very hard for us to put in the level of support needed. Yeah, it's just not, we're not be able to function at that plateau, for another word.
Do you think the Youth Guarantee Scheme could do something about that if it was pitched? I mean, I think all young people are really needing help at the moment, but if there were a section of it pitched at that level of young person that's left without qualifications to help them, maybe then give them a leg up towards the modern apprenticeship?
You could, but I think it lies with the way that the actual awards are devised. Because there seems to be, yes, the FA, take construction for instance, and I know I've used construction a lot, but there is no FA in construction. It doesn't exist. So you go from an SCP at level 4, which has just been rewritten, to a level 5, but then once they've been in there, sometimes you think, right, okay, we could go an HE, which then they'll go an NC and then go that route. Instead, there needs to be a better understanding of what the awards actually mean. And everybody, once they go in the modern apprenticeship route, understands what that means. And that starts at S2, S1 and S2. Whether we put in the Youth Guarantee Scheme, yes, but it needs to be education from a younger age about what a modern apprenticeship level is. It's not just about, and use the construction industry, we Jimmy getting an apprenticeship with his uncle, because that's perception. And that's what people think. And it's okay, he'll go to college, or she'll go to college and she'll do a wee bit here, and then that's that. Because that's the perception of what an apprenticeship is. And that's what we are trying very hard to change.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments about gaps in opportunities for young people? Tracy.
Hi, so I guess it's just taking the HE aspect. When we talk about young people, we're talking about quite a wide range of people in terms of ages and stages of education. So it's just to try and ensure that we've got enough kind of specialist and targeted provision for the different stages that young people are at as well, that would fit and flow through to higher education and exiting that. And in terms of one gap, I guess it's a gap because it's no longer here, but we, up until last year, had a scheme where there was funding incentives for SMEs to take on graduates. It was called ScotGrad, and that's been paused or mothballed or whatever you might call it, but it's not available currently. And in terms of the graduate labour market, the last available data showed that 44% of graduates were in SMEs. So I think I'm a bit concerned about having that, that's been taken away at a time that actually we really would want to be encouraging SMEs to be able to take on graduates. It was graduate internships from 6 to 12 months with funding incentives, which I think showed then that they would take them on into longer term. So there is a bit of a gap in terms of the jump from graduating and into employment that did plug, but obviously isn't available just now.
Tracy, why isn't it available? Do you know?
Funding, as far as I'm aware. So it was funding, Scottish Government funding, I assume. Not entirely sure.
We can maybe investigate why it's not available and whether it's going to come back on stream. Any other thoughts, comments from the others? No. Okay, thank you, Convener.
All right, thank you. That brings us to the end of this part of this morning's agenda. So thank you very much to our witnesses for coming in. I'll briefly suspend the meeting till around 11 o'clock before we move on to the next panel. Thank you. Well, welcome back to our session now on agenda item 3, which is the Scottish National Investment Bank. And I'm pleased to welcome today our two witnesses who are with us here in the committee room, Ailiad McTaggart, who is the Chief Executive Officer Designate, and also Willie Watt, who is the Chair Designate of both of the Scottish National Investment Bank. So if I might start by asking about the mission-oriented framework, and this was developed by Professor Mazzucato for the bank. Are you satisfied that the proposed missions meet the 5 criteria set out in the framework for the bank? I don't know who wants to start in response to that.
I'll start with this one, and then Ailey can come in. I mean, the short answer is yes. I think the 3 missions are certainly targeted and directional. And I think we think that they do meet the grand challenges that Scotland has in terms of creating a low carbon future, dealing with inequality and stimulating innovation, which in turn should help to deal with some of the demographic issues that we have. So I think that the missions are targeted and directional. It's for the bank to make sure that the progress is measurable. I think there is sufficient evidence from other investment organisations around the world that you can create measurable or data-based measurement of mission-based activity. So we need to put that into practice, and we're working on that at the moment. The time-boundedness is, I think, reasonable. I think there's no point in looking at these missions on a short-term basis because we won't move the dial, and the reason that they are grand challenges is that they are persistent issues that require attention. So I think it's right that there is a long-term time horizon on this, and you know the decision to pick 2045 for the low carbon mission is to coincide with the government policy on net zero, obviously, and then the other two, I think, a 20-year time horizon, it should allow real change to have embedded itself in the missions. I think also, you know, Professor Mazzucato's work on not being sector and discipline specific, I think that's right. You know, the missions have implications across all parts of the country. They have implications across all industrial sectors. And therefore, I think to just pick out 1 or 2 sectors or, you know, 1 or 2 disciplines would be wrong. So I think we're very much in agreement with that. And they give the bank the opportunity to build bottom-up solutions, as Professor Mazzucato has suggested. So, you know, I think, in short, they give us the parameters and the directionality that we need to you know, to fulfil the bank's aims. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add, Ailey. Okay.
What is then the priority for the bank? I mean, you talked about
in terms of the missions, or
well, I'm just thinking. Sorry, perhaps if I could just clarify the question.
Yeah.
You talked about innovation, but that was only the 3rd thing you mentioned. So, is there a list of priorities in terms of how things are approached, or how are these ranked? Because you've put that as the 3rd in terms of the things you mentioned. Was that just?
It's funny. That's always the way that they're written. They're written with net zero, placemaking, and innovation. That's so. But to answer your question, I think the First Minister has said that the priority, the kind of first among equals, or the #1 mission is the low carbon mission. So we have taken that on board, and what we need to do is work out what that means in practice. The other two missions are not any less important than each other. But if the low carbon mission is to be the #1 mission, then the other two by definition need to be subordinated to the #1. So I would put it as one and then two equal missions. Now, in terms of our activity, we think there will be quite a number of investments that we make that will cover more than one mission. For example, innovation covers technology investment, but if that's clean tech investing in some technology that cleans carbon or helps manage low carbon solutions, then that is clearly meeting two mission requirements. And if that business happened to be based in a place of high inequality, it could potentially be hitting 3 missions. So, when we report on our activity, what we will need to do is we'll need to make sure that we report each of the investments that we make against the missions that it is resolving, if you like, so that we can make sure that we're in the right, we're reporting on all of the activity that we're responsible for.
Yes, I mean, I wasn't suggesting that these three are mutually exclusive in any way, but when you talk about investment, most people think of investment as putting money in and expecting a return or holding a value at least. Is that part of your approach?
Yes, I mean, we reject the idea that commercial returns and mission benefits are in conflict with each other. We expect to see a mix of commercial return and mission benefits in every investment that we make. So we won't be making commercial investments that have no mission benefits, and the mission benefit investing that we make, we will expect to have a commercial return.
All right, thank you for that. I will now turn to questions from Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Convener. Just to pick up, Willie, on that point of commercial return and no apparent trade-off, but certain investments within the environmental sphere, for example, are more bankable than others, as you would expect. For example, an energy from waste plant versus other forms of less commercially bankable returns. How do you square that off in terms of your investment strategy?
Sure. So the bank will primarily be looking to invest in commercial projects. If something is too early on in that stage of evolution and it needs grant funding or sub-commercial funding, we will work with other agencies, potentially to have a slice of grant funding with a slice of commercial funding, or just encouraging that technology development. We are going to be looking at investing in the higher risk end of the spectrum, though, naturally, because we're to be a development bank. If the retail or high street banks and corporate banks are able to do the investments, we won't need to. So we will be trying to path lead into that as soon as we can make the technology commercially viable. But there's a little bit there where we'll be working with other agencies as well.
Thanks. And will that be reflective of both the rate of return which you expect as well as the payback time as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the key thing for rate of return, there's two things, is we're patient capital, and unfortunately patient capital has patient returns, so we won't see an immediate return from investment for many of our investments. We also be looking for the mission benefits as well, but the commercial return marries well with that. But that evolution for me is, once we want to get the bank to financially self-sustainability, and then we want to look at providing a positive return on the investments made to the people of Scotland, essentially where the money is coming from. So that evolution will take time, but we do firmly believe that we can, with time, provide a positive return on the investments that we make.
Thanks. Just again, in terms of your overall investment strategy, one of the issues that we've faced previously is size of investment, and particularly when we're talking about the circular economy, then we're often talking about small scale investments. How is the bank's appetite to those sorts of investments?
Yeah, so we'll be looking to invest across the piece. There is possibly a point where it's a little bit too small, but initially we will be looking at investments or projects and businesses looking for investment over a certain level. If we're looking at a project that's in a rural area or has a specific niche, for example, it's a startup circular economy recycling initiative or something there that is looking like it's worth looking at, we're not going to have a hard line that we won't look at it. However, what we need to be careful of is making sure that our impact is sufficient, and we are an investment bank and sitting at a certain point in the structure, so a certain scale will be required, but we will work very closely with others in terms of making sure that the financial ecosystem as a whole provides.
I think the other thing we can do is we can invest in funds that then are able to deliver smaller chunks of capital. The way that we see the bank's impact on the overall ecosystem of funding is to direct fund certain size of projects. We need to work that out, but then also to invest in funds which could then go deeper into the smaller scale companies. And our job is to make sure that those funds that we invest in are sort of fit for purpose, professional, doing exactly the job that we want them to do and are value for money. So a combination of those two things. And we were quite interested in the Logan report, which you may have seen, because one of the other challenges is scale up. And I think the bank has got quite a big role to play in terms of scale up. Because at the moment, there's quite a lot of angel investment, which I think does a really good job, but it's difficult for angels to follow their money as businesses scale, because obviously they have limited resources. So we can do that. And I think also the Logan report is highlighted that the venture capital sector in Scotland is immature. And one of the things we can do by investing in funds for early stage is help to foster that sector, because we can provide cornerstone investment for those funds to help get them off the ground. And then that will create more of a private sector ecosystem that will support early stage companies. So that's how we're thinking about that.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. And now we have questions from the Deputy Convener, Willie Coffey, who joins us remotely.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning. My question is about that scaling up potential, Willie. I was speaking only yesterday to Technology Scotland, and the discussion focused around how Scotland is really pretty good when it comes to innovation, generating new ideas, especially in digital sciences, biosciences, and even photonics was mentioned yesterday. So we seem to be really good at establishing things, but we don't seem to be so great at hanging on to them and allowing them to grow and develop and remain in Scotland. How do you see the bank performing perhaps that scaling up exercise so that we can hopefully see bigger companies emerging, growing and staying here in Scotland?
Well, I think the point is really well made, and we agree with it. There are some good examples of scale up. Skyscanner is the one that everyone talks about, but there are too few of them. And they're in too narrow sectors. So what is behind that problem? I think one issue is that the investors with the deepest pockets are not Scottish-based. They tend to be based in the west coast of the US or around Boston or in London or Berlin. And so we can be a deep-pocketed long-term investor. We can also hopefully crowd in other deep-pocketed long-term investors. Scottish Equity Partners, which is our preeminent private sector venture capital firm, it was recently rated one of the top 10 venture capital firms in the world. It was very instrumental in that scale up of Skyscanner. So we can do that. I think part of it also is giving management teams confidence to go further in the journey with their company rather than to sell out at an earlier stage. And why do they do that more often here than maybe in other parts of the world? Maybe it's they feel less confident about the overall ecosystem around. I keep using the word ecosystem. I'll have to start thinking about something a bit more original. But you know, how they're surrounded. The other tech companies. I think the Logan report was quite good on this. You know, that if you look at where there's been successes, it's where they've been able to create a whole host of companies around each other that give each other confidence. They made it big, therefore we can make it big, and we can go all the way through to a listing on the stock market. So part of it's confidence, part of it's long-term funding. Part of it, I think, is not selling the technology at the stage of spin out from university. As you say, there's, you know, I was reading give you an example, I was reading the Sunday Times Tech 100, and one of the leading companies in Oxford, which is in that Tech 100, the technology actually came from Dundee University. You know, and yet that company is now based in Oxford and is scaling up in Oxford. Well, I don't know anything about that example, but the question I would be asking is, well, why is that not happening in Scotland? Why is it happening somewhere else? So I think we need, as a bank, we need to ask ourselves those questions. And then, is it to do with the infrastructure around scale up, premises, skills, you know, those kinds of things? And if it is, are there investable opportunities around real estate and skills development that could foster scale up as well as actually investing in scale up companies? Is there anything you'd? No, good. Okay. So, sorry, it's a real issue.
Good answer. Is one factor part ownership and control, though? Do you see the bank as, if it's making investments to assist that scale-up process, taking some kind of part ownership or control of the company so that you can give that confidence and assurance that you're with a company during that kind of scale-up transition? And would that be something that do you think might help to turn that around a little bit more in our favour?
Well, yes and no. The working with a company and being a shareholder in that company, definitely yes. And you know, we've got investments that we're potential investments that we're talking to at the moment, where we are trying to have a dialogue not just about the here and now, but about the long term, and about helping those management teams equip themselves for the long term. Because we're a government institution, there are limits to how much of a shareholding we can take or how much control we can have. Otherwise, the investment goes on to the government balance sheet, and I don't think anybody particularly wants that to happen. So we have to be careful that we don't overstep the mark into being too controlling or controlling at all. But what we can do is we can be a challenging, supportive partner, and we can use our collective knowledge to help those companies go through that growth, those growth phases, for sure.
Very helpful, Willie. Many thanks. Back to you, convener.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. My apologies. I think one of the witnesses had a sort of very brief opening statement prepared to give, and that hadn't been fed through to me, so it was unintentional that we missed that out at the start. What I'll do is give you an opportunity at the end to perhaps do a brief summing up, as it were, if I may, in light of that. And I'm not sure the way things are set up whether or not you can see our remote members when they're asking questions on the screen. So, well, at least that's great then if that is working. So I'll now move on to questions from Andy Whiteman.
Thanks very much, Convener, and welcome to you both today. If I could maybe start with Ailey McTaggart. You mentioned, of course, the fact that this bank is going to be investing patient capital. I'm just wondering, in general terms, can you indicate what level of support you would provide to someone who came to you with a genuinely blue skies idea, you know, something that had a lot of potential, but actually very little development work had been done, but because it's so innovative, they find it difficult to achieve that advice and support to innovate. Is that something you envisage the bank being able to provide support for?
So the bank will be able to work with businesses and projects in terms of whether it's a technology project is a term we use in banking for something slightly different to a business, to finance their propositions. In terms of financial readiness, Scottish Enterprise do a lot of work on that with businesses, and we expect that to continue. So if somebody has a blue sky idea and they come to us and we think they actually need a little bit more help on the advisory and, and setting themselves up, we may refer to Scottish Enterprise. It will depend where they are in the spectrum of blue sky. And what I always say to the team and Willie is all of the investments the bank make are likely to be hard work investments. If it was an easy investment to do, the corporate bankers would be able to do it. We will be working quite hard with our counterparties to make sure that the business and the project is set up sufficiently, has the right controls, the right balance sheet protections, the right levels of debt and equity in the structure to realise their growth ambitions. If something's too early on when it comes to us in the blue sky phase where it really needs grant or sub-commercial funding, again, we'll look to either some funds, as Willie mentioned. There's the British Business Bank does some really great startup sub-commercial funding. There's some grant funding available, obviously, through various agencies within the Scottish Government, and we will try and make sure we're connected into that whole system so that we can point to the right person and work very closely with those people. What we don't want to do is simply say that doesn't work for the bank and send them off. We want to make sure that they get picked up within that whole ecosystem. So we're working very closely with the other public sector partners and also private sector partners in terms of I think it will be rare that we will provide 100% of finance to anything. We will always look to try and use the word leverage in other capital alongside the public capital, just to maximise the impact of that public capital we have. So we'll be constantly networking and talking to the market as a whole to make sure that everybody gets the service that they need.
Okay, thanks. That is useful because it reflects a little bit on the Deputy Convener's, Willie Coffey's question about losing some of the innovation in Scotland, in the sense that all agencies that are geared up to this need to be making sure they do as much as possible to try and encourage and assist entrepreneurs. Section 5, if I can move on, of the Act provides that you must prepare and update a balanced scorecard. Obviously, it'll be some time before you actually do that. But have you undertaken any work in terms of how you'll approach that task?
Yes, we have. So we have the Scottish Public Finance Framework, we have the UN Responsible Investment Framework, we have UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we're pulling all those together to track our investments. So we will look at financial return, but we'll also be looking at the full suite of mission impact returns, which encompasses given the nature of our missions, sustainable development and responsible investment and ethical investment parameters within all of them. So we are already doing work on that. A lot of work was done for the passage of the bill as well by the team before I joined. We're continuing to do work on that, and we will continue to perfect that by investment as we go and learn. We are a startup, and so we will be working on those things on a continuous improvement basis, is the terminology that I use with the team when we're talking about this. But we absolutely, as Willie's already alluded to, our reporting is not just going to be your usual bank reporting of numbers. It's going to be much wider than that and have that balanced scorecard embedded into it.
I think I heard you say that you're a startup. Is that correct?
We are a startup. We're a startup bank looking to invest in startup companies.
No, you are a startup bank. But you're not the only development bank in the world, or the only publicly owned development bank in the world. Have you found any particular financial institutions around the world that have been helpful to take lessons from or draw from their experience at the current stage you are in developing the bank?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had fantastic interaction with the British Business Bank, with the Development Bank of Wales, with InvestNL in the Netherlands, which is one of the most recent new development banks in Europe. We've had contacts with the EIB in my former career. I did a lot of investments alongside the EIB and the IFC and the World Bank. But we have been tapping into that well. Did you want to add?
Yeah. As you say, there is already quite a framework of work that's been done on this. Actually, the UN Principles of Responsible Investment, the previous company that I ran was AAA rated by the UNPRI and A+ rated for its sustainability reporting. So we can bring that to bear. But also we have, in putting the board together, I'm giving cognizance to bringing experience onto that board that can help us, because people have been there before. We haven't exactly finalised the board yet, but in terms of possible members of that board, there are 2 or 3 people who have a strong background in exactly this space, in both the public and private sector, who I think could add a lot to Ailey and the team in terms of helping us with this. So I hope that when our balanced scorecard sees the light of day, it will have that benchmarking that you talk about in terms of best practice in it. But also it will need to be tailored to the situation that we've got in Scotland as well. So it will be a mix of the two.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Thank you. And now questions from Colin Beattie.
Thank you, Convener. Let me ask you a straightforward one to start with. How confident are you that state aid permission will be secured from the European Commission before the end of 2020?
I'm fairly confident. We've had some really positive engagement with them in the last month or so, and I actually have a call with them again this afternoon. Our last engagement with them was at the end of July. We submitted the pre-notification, so essentially the draft notification at the beginning of June. I think it was the 3rd of June. We've had some back and forth on it. The engagement we had with them at the end of July was very positive. They were talking about drafting decisions. We're continuing, we went back with some answers. We have a call this afternoon, and we hope to get that in timely fashion. The conversations we've had have talked about decisions coming, so it has been a good and positive engagement of late, which I'm really pleased about. It is a time-critical element for the bank. You know, the Act doesn't allow us to be capitalised until the state aid consent comes in.
Clearly, time's short before the end of the year, and things are moving very quickly. If this does not come through, what are the implications of Brexit and for the bank's launch date?
Yeah. So if we don't have it by the end of the year, I think it will be a sitting down with ministers to discuss, you know, how we deal with that. But we are working closely with them to ensure that we don't get to that point. Would you like to add anything, Vinny?
No, I mean, as Ailey said, the Act is clear that without state aid approval, the bank can't launch. I think we would wish to sit down with ministers and decide what we should do if we were in that very unfortunate position that you paint for us. And I think ministers are leading on that issue, but clearly the bank team wants to be launched as soon as possible. We haven't talked about the COVID crisis yet, but clearly there's a huge pressure and impetus for the bank to launch. So we would be very concerned if we were in the position that we didn't have state aid approval.
But presumably you have a plan B. There's always a plan B. I mean, we can't assume that the permission is going to come through before the end of the year, because no matter how confident you might be with your discussions, there's all sorts of political implications that could come in that would derail it.
I mean, yes, of course, there are things that could derail it. The challenge of a plan B is knowing what the state aid environment will be that we'll be entering into. You'll be familiar with the political announcements by the government in Westminster about state aid. They are talking about a state aid environment that is much more permissive than the one that we currently have. There was talk earlier in the year that the Competition and Markets Authority would be responsible for the state aid regime. We have open discussions with the Competition and Markets Authority, but more recently we've been told that the Competition and Markets Authority may not be responsible for the state aid issue. So yes, it's important that we have a plan B, but candidly that plan B has a political element to it, which the government in Holyrood and the government in Westminster would have to be significant parties to, which means that the bank itself cannot come up with a plan B in isolation of our owners in the Scottish Government.
I mean, obviously, any delay in launching the bank is a great concern, and would I be correct in assuming that it would be reasonable to consider that if we did not get the permission from the European Union, then we would be virtually starting the clock again with a new agency, whatever it might be?
I'm not sure that I would assume that. There are other ways potentially that could be dealt with, but to be honest with you, that is something that ministers need to give us guidance on.
I mean, there's another problem, of course, which is the HM Treasury dispensation, which now forms part of the fiscal framework engagement. Now, this means that the bank's year-end financial position will need to be taken in as part of the overall Scotland Reserve, and that has implications for the degree of independence that the bank might have put in place by the government. How will that impact the operation of the bank? I mean, where are we on this?
Well, I think you summarised it absolutely correctly. It's part of a wider discussion that is above our pay grade. So it is caught up in that broader discussion, and that's where it sits. What Ailey and myself need to do is work out, well, how do we actually run a bank without that dispensation? And what we need to do is be very, very closely connected to the Scottish Government Treasury function, so that we can plan our access to capital and our capital requirements at the micro level, so that there are as few surprises as possible in terms of how much capital we need within any given time horizon. In the first year or two, we think that that is manageable. It is not a risk that is in the same category as the state aid risk. It's a manageable risk that with good faith and operational planning from the bank and the Scottish Government we can deal with. But clearly that derogation is something that is important to the bank and would really help us, and we would really like to have it resolved as soon as possible.
To what extent are you involved in these discussions?
We're not particularly involved in those discussions. They're being led by the Scottish Government. Would you expect to be involved? We would be happy to be involved in those discussions if it was felt that it would be helpful. It is important to the bank, and you know, I think wherever one sits politically, the missions that the bank is focused upon are for the good of the Scottish people. So I don't see this as being a political issue.
Most importantly, though, you're reassuring that the bank will not be delayed in its launch simply because of this. It just makes it more complicated.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. And now questions from Richard Lyle, who joins us remotely. Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Convener. Can I ask, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted plans for the bank, and what role will the bank play in the COVID recovery response?
So the bank has, since April, just after I joined, been working with Scottish Enterprise to try and support the government's response to the COVID pandemic. We are still in startup phase. We're not quite launched yet, but we do have the ability to do some investment, and we've been trying to support our colleagues across government in doing that. There was some discussion earlier on that Willie could possibly give more background, because it was before I started, on whether the bank launch should continue or not, given the COVID crisis. It was decided to continue. The most important thing for me here is the bank's focus is long-term patient capital. The bank shouldn't be involved in short-term working capital requirements for businesses, and there are other means by which that need can be met. If we are going to deliver the missions that we're being set, we need to keep that patient capital focus. But undoubtedly, a lot of the investments we make will help with the response to COVID. In many instances, when one looks at the missions, you can see an increased need for the missions and the issues they're addressing, inequality, green recovery, etc., as a result of COVID. So we believe the bank was already aligned essentially with what needs to be done to respond to COVID.
Can I now ask, the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery has recommended that the bank leverage public capital by issuing bonds as a pressing priority. How will the bank respond to this recommendation? And can I ask, previously worked for the Royal Bank of Scotland, if issuing bonds, will bonds be sold to the general public or just financial institutions?
I'll take the questions in order, if that's okay. I'll come to the investor second. So in terms of leverage, from my perspective, there's many ways to leverage private capital in alongside the public capital. I already touched on it earlier in one of the questions. We can co-invest with private sector capital on an investment by investment basis. We can invest in funds, as Willie already covered, and there'll be private capital in those funds alongside the public sector capital that the bank has. We can also establish our own funds, and that's very much an ambition that Willie and I share. We both come from banking and investment management, so I have a combination of experience there, and we are both aligned in our ambition to raise funds whereby we can use the public capital we have to cornerstone investments in those funds and attract in private capital and overall enhance and increase the impact of our missions. All of those things can then, in addition to that, we can also issue bonds. Now, Debt capital market issuances can take many forms. They can be bank level bonds, so the bank actually leverages itself. In recent years, for the last 10 years, you've seen green bonds being issued. Utility companies, for example, can issue a green bond. There's one, Anglian Water down south issued a green bond to put solar panels next to a reservoir to power the reservoir. You know, the green bonds can be used for many things. Social impact bonds are becoming increasingly common, and there's a number of development banks in Europe who've been issuing social impact bonds, whereby the actual funds raised by the bonds are directed towards a type of project which has a social benefit. That would be hugely beneficial for the bank. Most recently, HSBC has launched a transition bond for oil and gas companies moving out in those sectors. So all of those things are potential tools. I think for me, for the bank to start by an investment basis makes sense, and then build up to doing, essentially when you're raising money for a fund, you're often attracting pension capital. That same pension capital tends to be the biggest player in the debt capital markets in terms of buying bank debt, issued debt, social bonds or green bonds. I prefer the fund management side because you have a closer relationship with your capital. Typically, debt capital market is anonymous. You know, you give an update over the phone, whereas in a fund management, you're sitting in alongside, much closer to, excuse me, to your investors. But all of those tools would be advantageous to the bank, and Willie and I certainly have those ambitions for the bank.
Just to add, Ailey, I think we would be thinking that in the first instance, they would be institutional investors. I think the regulatory framework around offering fund or bond investment to retail investors is such that the bank it would take longer for the bank to be in a position to do that. And also we would want to be much more confident that any investment that was open to the general public was one that we absolutely understood. And so that's likely to take us a little while to get to a situation where we would be potentially issuing bonds or creating, investment funds for the general public. But certainly institutionally, as soon as we can.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Convener.
Thank you. And now, Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Convener. The committee received evidence from Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations and Social Enterprise Scotland, and they've got concerns about how the bank is engaging with charities, voluntary sector and social enterprises, and indeed co-ops as well. And I wonder how the bank will engage with these sectors, and also sectors such as community organisation that are economic generators as well.
Committed to, you okay with me speaking? Sorry. We're certainly committed to working with the third sector. I think it's going to be very important to the delivery of our missions. We've already had some engagement with Social Enterprise Scotland, Charity Bank. We speak regularly to housing associations who also sometimes get into the third sector, and we've been working with the education sector as well as a wider part of the third sector. Communicating and working with the third sector, the public sector, the private sector is absolutely critical for the bank's success. I wouldn't want to rank any of those people in importance. We need to make sure that we talk to everybody. If we don't, we may miss an opportunity to invest for our missions. You want to add anything?
Yes. The only thing I would add is Ailey and I had a meeting with the Chief Executive and the Chairman of Social Enterprise Scotland, I think in July, was it? Yes, July. We thought that was a very positive meeting, and we were very encouraged by what they were telling us. They would maybe like us to engage with them more sooner, but the pressure that we're on is to get the bank launched. And, we're not under any external pressure. This pressure is coming from ourselves because we know how important it is to get the bank launched as soon as possible. So what we've said to interlocutors that we could deal with in not just in the charity sector, but in commercial sectors is, look, we really have to get the bank launched. Once we're launched, then that is the right time for us to engage in deep discussions. So it's a matter of prioritising launch above pretty much anything else. And I know as chairman how hard the executive team is working on this, and we're really committed to doing that as quickly as we can. But we're not going to forget about the third sector. Absolutely not.
Okay. When the committee took evidence on the bill, they were told that the demand for finance was very mixed in Scotland, and obviously we've had the pandemic since then. If you're talking about getting the bank launched as a priority, and not maybe talking to those who would use the bank at the moment, does that mean that there's going to be quite a slow start for the bank? Once you get launched, then you're going to go out and try and stimulate demand in the market? Or are you working with other organisations, maybe not the voluntary sector, and those to stimulate demand now?
We are already working on some investments. We're balancing the launch with the need to start developing that pipeline. And also even the chatter about the bank coming has been stimulating demand. So we get a lot of contact, which we are working with. We're working on a number of investments. Of course, as time progresses and the bank builds and people see the types of investments we will be doing, that will in itself stimulate demand. We will be hiring a team. I'm in the process of hiring a team to stimulate that demand. We'll also be relying on others to send opportunities our way, as all good institutions do. We expect that Scottish Enterprise will refer a number of potential investments our way. We expect to see other agencies doing the same and working across both the public and private sector. So we haven't not started the stimulation of demand yet. We haven't got enough time to spend all our time on that until the bank's launched. There are some opportunities we're already dealing with. Obviously, development banks tend to be counter-cyclical as well. So we're looking at a downturn at the moment, and I actually think the demand for us will be even greater post-COVID than it may have been in a different cycle. So that demand stimulation is required, but it's not completely dormant at the moment.
Okay. I mean, the Scottish Government often cite the bank as being one of the roots out of COVID that's going to help the economy bounce back. I mean, how long do you think it will take from the bank coming into being to be, I suppose, running at full tilt?
In terms of actually doing investments, well, we have some in pipeline which will hopefully come through in the coming months. We're both bankers by trade. Investments are incredibly fickle in terms of actually the date that you get them done. COVID has delayed a lot of the things we were looking at, so there has been a slight dampening in some of the things we are looking at. I expect a progressive build. We need to walk before we run as well as we build up the team. We can't be running at full speed on day one, but I would expect to see us doing some investments this financial year and increasing that year on year in a gradual, measured way. We need to make sure that any investments we make are considered properly and structured properly. As I touched on earlier, the investments the bank makes, because of the nature of the bank being a development bank, they are more hard work investments. They require a lot of time to pull them together. In the private sector banking world, you may have a packaged up investment hit your desk and invest in a couple of months. It may take us up to 6 months to take an investment from an idea to actual financial close. But we will build gradually, and we already have some stuff in pipeline.
Just maybe to add to that, I think one of the differences between a mission-based bank and a development bank that maybe is just all about demand stimulation, is that once we have the team in place, we will seek out the right kind of investments that meet our mission. So in our world, that's called origination. So what we would be expecting to have in place, you know, by the middle of next year would be a fully functioning team of people that are capable of originating investments across the whole spectrum of the missions. And they will be going out into communities. They'll be talking to, Ailey has a very good phrase, I want to go and talk to the banks, not about the investments they are making, but about the investments they're not making. Because it's in the investments that they're not making that we will find the things that we need to do. So one of the key milestones in that, apart from the things we've already talked about, is actually hiring the team and getting it in place. And we've made a lot of progress on that since we last spoke to the committee in July, I think it was, or June. But until that team is in place, really it's quite hard to be as proactive as we would like on that origination.
So summer next year before you see...
I would like to think we will do some investments this financial year, so through April.
I think the question was, when will be really fully up and running, I think was what was behind your... but don't hold me to exactly... well, summer's not a date, so maybe it will be all right.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, John Mason.
Thanks very much, Convener. And maybe I can continue the kind of line of questioning that Rhoda Grant had about demand stimulation. I mean, Mr. Watt, you said earlier on that there was a lack of confidence you felt amongst management, often in Scotland, confidence about growing a business beyond a certain level. And I just wonder then how these two things tie together, the lack of confidence, because presumably that means there are some organisations out there who need your investment but aren't aware of it yet.
Yes, I mean that's quite possible, and one of the things that we will need to do once we're launched is to make sure that everyone is aware of what we are about and what we can do, you know, we'll be spending a lot of our effort on making increasing awareness. But I think in terms of demand, you know, there are certain other factors that are at play that maybe weren't there before, which is fundamentally strong companies coming out of the corona crisis with business plans that are very solid, but potentially with a lack of financial support. We don't exactly know how much banks will have to rein back what they can lend because of they're going to have to make provisions against losses, and that has a direct impact on what they can then continue to lend. We don't know what you know, private equity investors and angel investors are going to be able to do. So, but it's a reasonable working assumption that if there was latent demand before, there's going to be more demand. So I think it's right to stimulate demand in the sense that, you know, as the Logan report said, we don't have enough early stage technology-based companies. So I think it's, you know, demand stimulation is right and proper, but there is also something else, which is, you know, increased demand because the supply of capital may have shrunk. And so we're going to be involved with both of those.
Because I think that was the experience last time, 2008, 9, 10, that kind of time,
yeah.
that good businesses then couldn't get finance because it had shrunk.
Yeah.
As I understand it, the British Business Bank has a specific demand development unit. I mean, is that the kind of way you're thinking, or is it, Ms McTaggart's answer previously, it was more that demand would come from a range of places?
I think any good investment bank, whether it's public or private sector, will never be able to solely stimulate demand by themselves. They're part of an ecosystem. We will be hiring a team of, as Willie says, I call them originators, so they originate deals and investment opportunities. We will be working very closely with industry, with government, with businesses, and to ensure everybody knows we're here and what we can do and what sort of investments we're looking to do in demand stimulation. Others will potentially refer business to us for investment. You can't close the door on an idea, is what I will always say to my origination team. It might not be the right idea from that person this time, but next time they might have a good idea. So a very open and approachable unit for this is important. An actual demand stimulation team, I would normally embed that into the origination team, and that's certainly where we will start. We'll always look to others to see if they have better ideas than us in terms of how to improve on these things on a continuous basis, but initially origination team. But we also were going to have a partnerships and engagement team focused on speaking with everybody that we need to speak to, as well as the origination team.
I think as well, Scottish Enterprise has demand stimulation at the centre of its remit, and we need to work in partnership with Scottish Enterprise. I mean, they have a deeply resourced organisation that focuses on, you know, if you like, bottom-up demand stimulation, and you know, it's important that we work closely with them so that there's a seamlessness around, you know, support for enterprise that starts with maybe small grants at one end and ends up with scale-up capital of many millions of pounds at the other end. So I think that's an important requirement that there is that seamlessness, and that we do work well with Scottish Enterprise.
So if a small business was thinking of selling out, it might be Scottish Enterprise or HIE or South of Scotland who would persuade them not to, but to come to you instead?
Well, one of the things that Scottish Enterprise or HIE, South of Scotland obviously is in its own startup mode, but the other two do have you know, networks of relationships, and you know, we need to. It would be a complete waste if those relationships weren't linked together. But as Ailey said, we also intend to create our own relationships over time. But of course, as we keep saying, we need to get up and running to do that. But yes, I mean, I think you know, if there was a technology business that was saying, you know, we're thinking of selling, we would say, well, why are you doing that? What's your motivators? Is there another way that you could take this to the next stage? Could we help you do that? And these would be the sort of questions we would be asking. You know, where does lack of finance come into that equation, or is it more about you need skilled people and they're only available in Silicon Valley or Berlin or wherever? So that is the kind of dialogue that we would definitely want to be part of if we could. And if we, you know, there's something that we're working on at the moment that is almost exactly that, where we were introduced to a business by Scottish Enterprise, and we're in quite an exciting dialogue with them. So it's going to be a mixture of those things.
That's great. Thanks very much. If I could touch on just one other subject, the rate of return got mentioned earlier on, and you kind of were explaining how the mission and the rate of return relate to each other. Is there a target rate of return? Is there going to be a target rate of return?
Ailey and I believe that the bank should have a target rate of return, but that should be calculated on a long-term basis. I mean, Ailey was talking earlier in answer to questions around, you know, it may take a period of time for returns to manifest themselves. And also, you know, we will be doing riskier investments than the private sector, otherwise why do we exist? So we need to think carefully about the target rate of return, but I think it's important because returns need to be related to the cost of capital. Now, our capital is being provided by government, but equally it's still real money, and therefore comparing returns on that money with, with recognised cost of capital calculations is important. The bank, as Ailey said, needs to be self-sustaining. You know, we need to create positive returns when we can then reinvest those in, and we can't be self-sustaining unless we make positive returns. But we need to take into account both the time horizon and the risk-return profile before we actually set that. Now, the Act is very clear that it's for ministers to set the rate of return, but the bank has the technical expertise, and the bank board will have the technical expertise to have a very clear judgment on these things. So we will be in discussions with ministers about a target rate of return, but yes, we believe we should have one, and it should be measured on the long-term basis.
I mean, I'm sure we all agree it should be long-term, and we're all very patient as politicians, as you know. The kind of figures we've seen have been British Business Bank has a target rate of return of 2.5%, but actually achieved 4% in the recent year. I understand the Welsh Bank doesn't have a target rate of return, and SIB made 0.7%. So can you even give us a kind of indication as to what range you would be thinking about?
Well, one comment I would make is that an organisation is setting a long-term rate of return. The actual returns that it makes will fluctuate around that rate. So I'm not surprised that the British Business Bank returns might be higher than their long-term average. Than their current. Their current.
Yes, they've had a good year, but they might not have a good year every year.
We need to do the work in that, but certainly we're talking about single-digit rate of return, and I don't want to be specific because we haven't done the work, but it's going to be in the same sort of ballpark as those other institutions that you've mentioned. But it has to be a positive rate of return, and it has to be achievable over the long run, and it needs to take into account the risk reward. But we really need to do the work. And one of the issues we've got, of course, is we've got no track record of having made any investments. So, we believe, based on our professional experience, that we can find mission-based investments that will make us positive returns. And we'll be looking at equity investments that might be over a 5 to 10 year time horizon, and potentially project finance investments that are over a 25 or 35 year time horizon. So we'll need to pull together all of our knowledge and use the people we're bringing on the board who are very experienced in this area too, to come up with something that we think makes sense. But as I've said, that kind of guidance I've given you gives you a sense of the gut feel as to where we think it should be.
Okay, that's helpful. So my final point would be, what would be the timescale for that? When do you think we would have a rate of return?
As I said, the setting of the rate of return in the legislation is at the behest of Scottish ministers. So it's for them to set the rate of return. But I don't see any reason why we couldn't set a long-term rate of return in the first year of the bank's existence. We need to make sure that we've got it right, as I said, but it will be a long-term rate of return, and I think it's a useful tool for us to manage the bank, because it makes sense to have a target rate of return. It needs to be set at the right level so that we don't mitigate what we're trying to do with emissions. And I think the Scottish people deserve to know that the bank is serious about its mission. So I personally, I think we would be able to recommend to ministers something within the first year, and then ministers then would need to pick that up.
Thank you.
Just to pick up on the last points, rate of return investment, historically low interest rates. How does that fit together? Because some might question, just on the face of it, what is a return in current circumstances if this carries on, or if we end up in negative interest rates, for example?
Well, the cost of capital is at a historic low, as you just say. So the cost of capital has a direct relationship to the long-term returns that can be generated. We would be looking to make returns over and above the cost of capital, but because that cost of capital is so low, then that has informed the kind of returns that your colleague mentioned from other development banks. They are in the ballpark that they are in part because of where debt-based returns are. So
well,
we'd expect.
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt you, but is that partly because of where they started? I mean, you're starting or trying to start now.
Yes.
At the current rate of returns, some of these have started years ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what you'd expect any institution to review its rate of return within with the light of experience. So I mean, I don't know the history of the British Business Bank, but I would imagine that they set a long-term rate of return, and then they review that rate either annually or every 2 or 3 years. In the light of changing interest rates. But interest rates have been low. They haven't been as low as they are now, but they have been significantly low for a long time. And of course, deposit rates have been almost zero for a considerable length of time too. So it's not new that we're in a low interest rate environment. It's new that it's as low as it currently is post-COVID. But it's relevant. You're right to say that the interest rate regime is relevant to the long-term rate that's achievable.
All right. I think there are no further questions from committee members, so we will close the session at this stage, but I wanted to give an opportunity to do a brief summing up, not having afforded that at the outset, so to speak. I don't know if one of you, or you may feel that all the issues that you wanted to see covered, you've been able to cover, but otherwise the floor is yours, so to speak.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, thank you to the committee for inviting us to give evidence today. We look forward to obviously creating a relationship with this committee over time, and I'm sure we will be back to speak to you on a number of occasions in the future. Since we last met in July, we have made significant progress with the launch work that we're doing. As I said earlier on, the team is working incredibly hard towards the launch. The issues that were raised by the committee are the right issues. They are things that we think about ourselves in the course of our day jobs. We're working as hard as we can to get this development bank up and running. So that's, I think, anything else you'd want to add, Ailey?
We are very focused on launching in the final quarter of the year. So.
All right. Well, thank you to both of you. I will now suspend the meeting, move to private session, and we'll have a brief break till 20 past for members. Thank you.